Hey guys, what's going on? What is up? This is the movie discussion pocket dimension where time does not exist and the only thing that matters is film, which we've been off for so long that I actually forgot to do our little line, our little slogan last episode. I just said,
Oh,
welcome
I
to the
didn't
movie
even
discussion
realize.
pocket dimension, and then we went going. I'm Cole and that's Jay, and we're back, like as promised, trying to, finally get some consistency going with 2022 after doing the thin red line last week. So
Yeah,
this
quite a different movie this week.
quite a jump, which I like in a way because
Yeah,
and Jay and I were talking about it because sometimes at least me, maybe not, maybe I don't know if Jay is much, but a lot of times what happens with me is I get in sort of moods for types of movies and things like that, and that sort of determines how I might want to go forward with the show. This time I was in no mood in particular at all. Didn't really matter. Could have been anything. And I just sort of sent a list to Jay of things that I knew that I had, and he hadn't seen this movie, The Last Days of Disco, and he picked it, and that's what we're at. So this is from 1998 by writer-director Whit Stillman, and I
I'd
guess
never
it's
even
not
heard of this movie. I'd totally off my radar completely.
right. It's I mean, Whit Stillman was never sort of a mainstream guy. He never had like big hits or anything. And what he's most known for is the thematic trilogy that this movie is a part of, being the third. The first one was 1990, a movie called Metropolitan, which I recorded but haven't seen yet. 94, a movie called Barcelona, and now this one. And what he called them, it was like the doomed bourgeois in love series, is what he himself called it. So it's always about sort of young people of a certain socioeconomic background and their various romantic entanglements and stuff. And I don't know if the movies are set in the same universe, but they do have some things like a couple names and characters that are in the other two movies do pop up in this movie. Not that it's important at all or that you need to know. But yeah, I mean, Metropolitan was his first movie, and it was another one of those cases where it wasn't like it was a big hit or anything. But as far as like critically went, it was well received, and he was considered, I guess, something of a talent to watch. I don't know. I don't think he was ever the type of guy that had much of a budget or anything to go on. I don't remember when I first became aware of the movie, but I only did just see it in the last year. Finally, it was a movie. I'm trying to think. I think it got on my radar because a couple years ago I was on the Criterion site just looking at the long list of movies they had, and
Hmm.
this was on there, and I was like, "What is that?" Because it rang a bell, like I had at least heard the title somewhere before, and it was after that I looked into it because yeah, for whatever reason, this movie has a Criterion release, which I'm kind of
Hmm.
interested in.
And for those of you that are interested, this is available on archive.org
Oh,
to
okay, so
watch.
that's helpful. Yeah, happened
But
to be on
it
Crave
has
for me.
the Criterion logo and everything at the beginning. So
Yeah, happened to be on Crave for me, and I put it on my list a few months ago and watched it. I was like, I hope it's still there, and it was just around that time because things often line up for me. It was around that time. This is back when I still had some channels because I got rid of my channels back in the summer. When I often patrol TCM and try to see if there's stuff, there was Metropolitan. So I've had that recorded for a while. So hopefully I'll be watching that soon, and then maybe I can track down Barcelona, the middle one, and see how they compare. But this is the best known of the three. It probably helps that it has Kate Beckinsale in it, who would go on to become something, maybe not a huge star, but definitely somebody who was well known. Chloe Sevigny is in there too as Alice. At the time, all she was really known for was she was one of the actresses in Kids.
hmm
So that's weird because that suggests that she was one of those people that didn't even really have ambitions to be an actor. Because like weren't most of the actors in Kids just people they sort of picked out because they liked how they looked?
yeah,
They weren't like kid actors that came into audition, right? And that
I
always
think a lot of
interests
the
me.
guys were skateboarders, like
There you
real
go.
skateboarders.
Yeah. So Chloe Sevigny, she's just had a really interesting career as far as movies she's in. Now she's in one of the most rare and under the radar movies we've done on the show. She was in Demon Lover, remember that? Which is a French language film, and she's in that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Speaking French, for way back for our French. What was it? The Extremity series. And as Jay pointed out, we're like the only people on the internet to even talk about or acknowledge Demon Lover. So if anybody is interested in that movie, we're the source to go to because everywhere else it's like maybe like a half paragraph review of the movie.
Hmm.
But anyway, so yeah, Chloe Sevigny's always played sort of interesting roles. Is she in Boys Don't Cry?
Yes.
Yeah. So I kind of tip my hat to Chloe Sevigny because Sevigny or how do you say? Cause she's always seemed to have taken sort of more off the beaten path type
Hmm.
roles.
Yeah.
And I mean, part of it maybe is because she's attractive, but she's not as classically beautiful. They even talk about it in the movie, which is kind of funny. She's not as classically beautiful as a lot of actresses, so maybe she also didn't get the same opportunities, for some of those
Mhm.
roles too. But I just really kind of like her body of work, because the one thing I can say, like, I'm not saying all her movies are like my favorite movies, but she's in a lot of interesting movies. But as it
Mhm.
happens, I do like this movie very much, and it's going to be another one of those ones where I kind of struggle to explain why. Although a big part of it is dialogue. This movie is very dialogue heavy, and it's actually some of my favorite dialogue, and that's why I'm interested to watch the other two movies, because I'm like, this Whit Stillman guy. It seems like he has got a good handle on cool
Mhm.
dialogue. So
Wasn't she also in the movie with not Adrian Brody? Damn it! I always get this other guy mixed up. Anyway, she was filleting someone, and it was like popular because it was uh, Vincent Gallo, I believe, because
oh,
it
okay,
was like a real, like it was real, like it wasn't like a simulated thing.
yeah. Again, that doesn't surprise me, because she's sort of hardcore in a way. I don't mean in a pornographic way. I just mean, yeah. I mean, she's one of the prostitutes, I think, in American Psycho or something. So she's in a pretty sexually explicit scene in that movie. Oh man, I didn't know she was. Besides Kid, she's also in Gummo. Wow.
Yeah, I thought she was in some more of his movies.
She's in a lot of like uncomfortable movies, isn't she?
Hmm.
She's in.
Yeah.
I mean, she's in Dogville. She's
Oh
in
God.
Demon Lover, American Psycho, Julian Donkey Boy, Kids, Gummo.
Oh, Jillian
I
Donkey
mean,
Boy. Fuck.
all just really uncomfortable movies. Things in there. She's in Zodiac, although I don't really remember it.
Hmm.
Anyway, so she's been around. And a lot of interesting stuff. I haven't. The last thing I
Oh,
saw her in was The Dead Don't Die, which everybody hates.
she was a secretary in American Psycho. Okay, I was trying to
Okay.
remember if she was.
So she wasn't in the sex scene. Okay, I thought she was one of the two like
Uh,
prostitutes that he goes on the date
don't
with.
just stare at it, Sabrina.
Yeah. No, she's just the secretary. That's
Which
kind of.
I'd love to cover that on here. I know it's kind of mainstream, but
I mean, I like the movie a lot too, so I could see us doing it. It might be mainstream, but it still is some pretty sort of extreme subject matter. Plus, it's a really
mhm.
great satire. And this movie itself has satirical elements to it too. It's a interesting movie to classify. You could just call it like a comedy drama or comedy romance type thing. It's in that sort of in between thing, but you can
Mhm.
even narrow it down further. Like, it has resemblances to a comedy of manners, because there's different versions of that. I mean, the classic is sort of the British thing with the thing, but comedy of manners can be also be pretty flexible. Like, you could say, like, most like a lot of like Wes Anderson films are comedies of manners, for instance. So you can see that fits in here too.
Mhm.
Yeah, it definitely has a few different labels that you could affix to it. And obviously, it is a period piece coming out in 1998, and saying it's set in the very early 80s, albeit the last days of disco. And I don't want to get too far ahead, because that's more like for finishing off. But it is. I like the idea of people living through the end of an era, and how
Mhm.
something ends, and you sort of feel it. You feel it ending. And
Yeah.
disco was a very obvious one, like
Mhm.
more so than other eras of things, whether it's music or fashion or whatever. It's all we've always talked about this, because it's the same thing when we said stuff like when we talked about like eras in film, right? We did the new Hollywood era. It's like, well, was there a hard beginning to that? Was there a hard ending? No, not really. It's more of a
Mhm.
you know a gradual thing. But disco, unlike a lot of eras, has almost a really sort of clear beginning and end to it. Also because it had such a strong backlash in the end. Now
Yeah.
it doesn't fit historically, because this is set in the very early 80s, but they do show the events on, oh, what's the name of that field? It's not Soldiers Field, it's the other field in Chicago, when they had the disco
Wrigley.
night. No, it's not Wrigley either, otherwise I'd remember it. But
Hmm.
anyway, they show the
I'm
events
not
of
sure.
that, and they make it seem like it happens during this movie, but that actually happened in the summer of 79. Because the idea there too was, just because that happened didn't mean disco immediately died, but it did have a sharp decline after that. It always makes me sad too, because as somebody, I'm not really a disco fan, but I don't dislike it either. And I always think like the people that judged disco so harshly in those days, like, had no idea what was coming.
Why the you know hatred? I mean, why was it so violent and everything? Like why do people hate disco so much?
I mean, at first, I think it just sort of started with people that liked hard rock and things because it was sort of the opposite of that, right? You know, like, oh,
Right.
it doesn't have any edge to it. It's just about commercialism and selling out and stuff. You know, you have people like Alice Cooper saying like how much he thought disco was stupid and stuff like that. And then I mean, that whole event, it really got. It's almost you can almost trace it to the one guy that he was some radio DJ, right? That like made a whole point of he brought who the whole disco sucks thing going. Like he's the one that had them making T-shirts about it and all this shit.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think that guy really went overboard. And that's even assuming like the thing didn't turn into a massive riot, which of course it did. The idea was just to like blow up some stuff. But of course it turns into a massive riot, people running out onto the field and all this shit, like just a horrible debacle. And in the time, you know, it's funny because I think just recently there was like a book burning somewhere in Tennessee or something like that. And whenever you see stuff like that, it's just so disappointing. It's like, where are we going as society? Are we going fucking backwards? Because I mean,
We are. Yeah.
yeah,
It's literally Fahrenheit 451.
yeah, right. So, and then I mean, and I know that's how a lot of artists and people connected disco felt in that. It's like, whoa, we made some music that people liked and had fun with and dancing. Like, what is this awful backlash? Why are people reacting in such a negative way? And I'm just thinking, like, as I said, those people that got caught up in that frenzy, I was like, if any of them are still, if some of them are still alive, I was just like, music's gotten a lot wussier since disco, as far as I'm concerned. But I mean, it's such a big impact. Like, think about the Bee Gees, who were a big group, and they kind of unconsciously got caught up in disco. We just happened to write some really big disco hits, and that became their identity. They're the disco band, right?
Right.
So they got hit almost hardest of all by the backlash of that. And if you look at that time in their career, they actually had like a hiatus. They stopped putting out albums and took themselves and didn't go on tour and took themselves as the public eye. But being songwriters, because people who are Bee Gees fans will always say, you know, they didn't just have their own hits; they wrote big hits for other people. That was why they wrote hits for other people. Because like, you know what, the public doesn't want to see us right now. I mean, our fans do, obviously, but we're just going to step back and do some writing for some other people. And some big songs came out of that, like the Islands in the Stream song, you know, that Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton did. They wrote that. And they wrote several other really big songs in that era. And yeah, it was really just because of that awful backlash that they just were sort of on hiatus for a little while because they were like, this is just too much negativity.
Is it like a whole punk movement? Like, isn't that like around when punk music? Like,
Yeah, and that's also true too.
Like,
Like metal and punk had really just started to emerge in the late 70s and become sort of a big deal. And yeah, so you can see they cast themselves as the opposite of disco. Disco is what's hip and popular and cool, and all the stupid people like it. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'm not a dancer, and I never will be a dancer, but I've always do kind of like disco. Have a soft spot for it. I mean, not all of it, but there's a lot of songs in this movie that I legitimately like.
Yeah, it has a lot of the big hits in there. Now that's what I call disco volume 12.
Yeah. It is true too that, like, I mean, disco had a more definitive ending than a lot of things, but it is funny how every time something becomes big, everybody acts like it's going to last forever. It's like, this will be cool forever.
Yeah,
and then,
the guy,
and then there's always these people that like wind up going bankrupt because they were too dumb to realize that, you know, there's a diminishing law of diminishing returns on things and things end. There's always somebody that goes bankrupt or something because of everything they put into it. You know, we saw the same thing as kids with like grunge, right? You know, you get into about 94, Kurt Cobain dies, and you see like in the Sears catalog, you could buy like grunge already ripped jeans, and here's your flannel and all this shit. You know, it's like, yeah, it's over.
Yeah, grunge didn't last long. I mean, the bands that stayed around and are still around like changed their sound, you know, pretty dramatically.
It's funny.
Like
I'm more
Pearl
of a
Jam.
child. I'm more of a child of post grunge than grunge, as much as I like grunge. But like the first bands that I loved were mostly sort of at least the American bands for sure, were really caught up in that whole sort of post grunge thing. Not just American. Like one of the biggest post grunge bands was Bush, and the first album I ever bought was 16 Stone, the first album by Bush, which is like one of the definitive and first, because it came out in '94, sort of post grunge records. So
that's a great album too.
Yeah, still holds up great. Yeah, so those were all a lot of bands that I loved at the time and still like a lot. And as you said, ones that stuck around like a Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, they shifted their sound a little bit until they were kind of more post grunge, and in Pearl Jam's case, they became even more experimental and
Pearl Jam's like folk music now.
folky and acoustic. And but I get it. If you're a musician that long, it's hard to just keep doing the same thing as much as fans get at. That's why I always like. It's always amusing to me when I talk to like diehard Metallica fans that like freak out over the Black Album. I was like, well, I mean, they had to do something different after they did like 4 or 5 huge thrash metal albums, and you want to call them sellouts because like for the 6th one, they decided to change it up a little, you know. And they're just like, I'll never forgive Metallica with it. I'm like, okay, you know.
Yeah.
Because I'm not saying, oh, you should accept the Black Album is just as good as those albums. If you don't like it as much, that's fine. But I mean, I totally understand why the band decided, you know, it's time to do some things differently.
The Sellout album, or I mean, the start of the Sellout album.
Start of it, because I mean, Load was really the
Loads.
Load was them really going for the alternative rock, which was, you know, part of the post grunge was a part of, you know, the 90s was alternative rock, which is my favorite stuff. But yeah, Metallica were not well suited to that. You know, they should have. But again, I get why they did what they did. And going back to disco, it's funny when you saw like by the late 70s, several groups that didn't like Kiss put out a disco song. I Was Made for Loving You was a disco song. The Rolling Stones did Miss You, which was a big disco song. So it's not like things didn't go the other way. St. Anger's like the worst thing I've ever heard as far as Metallica goes. I can't believe that. It's just awful. Now, I didn't hear anything after that. I never heard Death Magnetic or anything they've done. But I just remember not really even being a Metallica fan, but like just being curious about what St. Anger was like. And it's just so joyless and sludgy and soulless. No, it didn't even have guitar solos, you know? I don't think a single song had like a solo on it, which seems really weird. Again, I get it. They're making changes, but I don't know. Like most bands, you get to a certain point and the magic's not there anymore. And that's not a criticism. That's just reality. It's not like, well, Metallica, pack it up, go home, you suck. I mean, it happens to all bands. You eventually reach a point where it's kind of like we were saying about eras. Things decline. Things end. You know, can't be on top forever.
Yeah, I don't think I mentioned this last week, but I saw Tool live finally.
Yes, that's right. I knew you were going to.
It was weird, man. It's been so long since I've been to a concert. I didn't know what to expect, and everyone just sat in their chairs the whole time.
Yeah,
which I mean,
that would weird me out with
me. You know, it was in a huge arena, you know, jam packed. Same place the Stars play, actually.
Yeah,
it was in the same. United Airlines, something like that.
They change names so often I can't keep track anymore. I miss the days when arenas had distinctive names that didn't have anything to do with corporate sponsorships. But that's a whole other show of things to bitch about.
Yeah, I miss those days. But
yeah, I never saw Tool, but I did see A Perfect Circle back in 2000. And they might have played 1 or 2 Tool songs, but back then I didn't know well enough to know. So I think they might have.
Their drummer is just insane, man. Like he was on like display. He was on a big pedestal, and
that's cool. It
was a great show all around. Like all the effects and the lighting and everything was really cool. But man, I don't know how that guy does it. Like he just went out there and played for like 3 hours. I'm like, you know, I don't know how he wasn't tired.
I know they're not that young anymore. You know. Yeah, that's impressive.
Maynard, the show is at like. They probably didn't come on until like maybe 8:30, something like that. And he was like, I'm usually in bed by this time. Maynard, he's just like an old like geezer now. He's got a winery.
That's funny. Yeah. I guess I sort of saw him in his prime in 2000 because when A Perfect Circle came out, you know, he was probably still in his 30s. And he came out shirtless, wearing like leopard skin tight pants. And he had long, dyed blonde hair, very sort of artificial blonde, looking down to his shoulders, you know. I was like, that's not what you look like in the video, because I was thinking of the Perfect Circle video. You know? It's not like he always look the same or anything. He was kind of arrogant, but it was still a really good performance.
Yeah, I'd heard that before, too.
There's way worse on-stage behavior than him, so I'm not going to pick on him. But he just sort of seemed aloof in a way, almost like he was too good to be there. You know, it was Halifax after all, not Dallas. But even if that's true, you know, they played well. You know, they didn't half-ass it. They played well.
But there was something you said that reminded me of this.
He's thinking, how did
The
Billy
g-
Corgan rope me into doing this? Sorry, but I
There
figured
was a
I figured that's how it worked because the Pumpkins were on that
gotcha.
show, so I figured that's how the people like him, people like A Perfect Circle, wound up involved, was because of Billy Corgan. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
There was a guy a few rows behind me that I guess he thought he was being funny. He kept screaming Slayer like at the beginning of every song, like we're at a Slayer concert. And I don't know. I just thought it was.
There's
I mean,
one
it
like
wasn't
that.
funny the first time. I mean,
Yeah.
like the 10th time, it was just kind of annoying.
Oh man, there's stuff like that at every show. It just depends upon where you are if you can hear them during Frosh Week. So this would be just like a little over a year after the show I said Somersault in 2000. So September 2001, I went to see Canadian band Watchmen, who are a really cool, fun group, and they gave a good performance. And during the whole thing, there was some idiot drunk guy that kept screaming, "Take your shirt off!" to the point that, like, Daniel, the lead singer, heard him multiple times. And it was just like, how about you first? And at one point, it's like, well, remember you as the take your shirt off people. And we're like, no, please do not judge us by this one moron. There's always some idiot, drunk or not, maybe drunk, maybe not. They always think they have some like witty, funny thing to yell.
I know it used to be Freebird. That was the thing people would yell.
Yeah.
Like,
play
for
Freebird.
everything.
No matter what band you are, play
Right.
Freebird. Yeah.
And that was always stupid too.
Yeah.
I hope he was drunk.
Yeah.
If he wasn't, he's an annoying motherfucker.
Yeah. Oh, there's lots of those. Like I said, it just depends upon where you're sitting, whether you can hear them or see them or not. But there was more than one guy like that at that show, I'm sure. He just happened to be the one in your proximity.
Oh
That's
man,
cool,
this
though. I
one
haven't
guy
seen anything cool in so many years.
This one guy ate shit right in front of us. Like we were at a it's just all concrete, and I'm like right at the top of the top of the level, and he fell from I don't know 20 stairs up.
Oh God!
And then fell down right in front of me. And then he fell down this row of stairs and got up like no problem. I was like, oh, that dude broke his arm or something,
Yeah, he'll
I don't
feel
know
it
how he didn't hurt
tomorrow.
himself.
Whatever drugs he's on right now
Yeah.
he's feeling no pain, but he'll feel it later. Man, that sucks. I mean, there is something to be said about adrenaline during a show. I mean, A Perfect Circle is when I got bruised ribs. I was right in the front on the thing, but only a few feet back was like the big mosh pit, and I was like, stay the hell out of there.
Yeah, I was never a big mosh guy.
I was 16 years old, maybe 120 pounds, trying to shield my even tinier sister.
Yeah. I feel like it's always like guys that want to fight and they just, like they want to punch people, so they go in the mosh pit and do that shit.
That's definitely what it is. Because technically, like if there's mosh etiquette, you're not actually supposed to throw punches. You're just supposed to like crash into each other, right? But it's always like somebody's like, I'll act like I'm offended by the way he crashed into me, and then I can punch him.
Yeah.
And, you just got people punching, and then unless they're insane or on drugs, the smaller people move out, and then usually what you have is 4 or 5 big tough guys trying to show how tough they are to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Like the music doesn't matter anymore at this point. It's just
right.
That even happens places like here, because I saw some of it sort of kind of from the back looking over me during A Perfect Circle.
Man, I can't remember what show I was at one time. It was like not not music you would mosh to, and they were trying to get a mosh pit going. Like, guys, it's I can't remember what it was, but it was funny.
Yeah. I can understand. They're like, we have no outlet for this. Let's just pretend. Aggression. Yeah, let's just pretend this is really hardcore stuff. Anyway, to the movie. Yeah, so I love the opening. I mean, I like a lot of the opening is 25 minutes long. The whole opening is at the club or just in the immediate, like outside the club, the front and the back, except for one like 30-second scene where you see Josh and his friend like in the diner, and Josh is talking about how much he admires disco and the idea of disco clubs, even though he doesn't have much experience with them. Besides that, everything else is 25 minutes in and around the club. And I just think it's really deftly done. I really like how it goes from the different characters and groups of characters and introduces them and just sort of sweeps around the club and gives you a really good feel for the atmosphere and everything. I don't know. I just really appreciate that kind of filmmaking. I think that's the kind of thing that like you take for granted usually when you're watching, but if you stop and think about it and what went into it, if you take like a script, but then actually putting it on the screen, like technically what you have to do to visually tell the story. I really like it. I like it a lot. And by the time it's over, I think again it's always hard on a first watch to totally get a sense of all the characters and who's who. But I think it does a pretty good job for the most part.
Mhm.
I'm not saying I always remember. There were parts in the movie I can remember like the first time where I would get Jimmy and Jeff confused. Not Jimmy and Jeff.
That's
Jimmy and Josh. I would get Jimmy and Josh confused. But
I was about to say the same thing. Like, there's like 5 brunette white dudes that all look kind of similar. I
it's
mean, they're
kind of
exactly the
similar.
same,
Yeah.
but it was confusing to me. I was on the IMDb like, who is this guy again? And okay,
Yeah. And again, they're
trying to
not.
get the
Yeah, they're not
character
really well known actors either. Which it helps in a way. Like I said, sometimes well known actors are kind of distracting, and sometimes it's easier to just get into characters when you don't have to worry about.
the guy that plays Dez, Chris Eggman, however you pronounce that.
I like him.
How is it?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know how to say it. I just said I liked
sorry.
it. It might be Eichmann. I'm not sure.
He's the one with the gay mouth.
Yeah, he was the one who worked at the club. He was in the other two, by the way. He was also in Metropolitan in
You're right.
Barcelona, but I guess as
noticed
different
that.
characters. Apparently,
When I
at
was
one
looking at
point, like Ben Affleck was considered for that role that he plays Dez. I could see Ben Affleck playing it. I mean, I like this guy
Mhm.
better, but I could see
Yeah.
like the Ben Affleck of the late '90s playing that role. I like this guy. He reminds me a little bit of Stephen Colbert in a way.
Yeah. A few years before this movie, he was in a movie called Kicking and Screaming.
Yeah, I've heard
It's
the title.
kind of similar. It deals with like relationships and stuff.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't seen it. I haven't really seen anything else he's in, to tell you the truth.
That's a Noah Baumbach, I think, his first movie.
Yeah, I've heard
Eric
of it.
Stoltz is in there. Not a lot of well-known actors, but a lot of guys in this movie, or a lot of actors in general. I was like, oh, I've seen them and stuff, but I couldn't like pinpoint their name,
Right.
like character actors or whatever.
Yeah. As I said, for me, it would help me just sort of see them as characters when I didn't have to think about them as like sort of name actors. So it was helpful in a way, but as we both said, at times some of the guys you can kind of confuse them a little bit. But
Yeah.
I've watched it a couple times in the last week, so I got pretty good at keeping them straight. It was really only Josh, who is the lawyer that winds up with Alice at the end, and Jimmy, who was the ad guy who she had a crush on at the beginning. So I mean, the way is as much as I like the setting and everything in the disco backdrop. I mean, the movie doesn't have much of a plot. I mean, it's all held together by just the relationships of these people. So either you find the characters compelling and interesting to watch, or you don't. And if you don't, the movie totally fails. See, it's not one where I say I like the characters because I think they're likable people. I just like them as characters because I think they are actually compelling and interesting to watch and interact with each other. And I think whenever I talk about, because there's always movies that have like funny dialogue or what you consider good dialogue, but the difference there is you could say like, oh, that movie had like clever, witty, sort of snappy dialogue. I enjoyed it, but usually in like 99% of those movies, you accept that that's not really realistic, though. It's like, well, people don't really talk like that. I like that in this movie, there's some witty, snappy stuff in it, but I do feel like it's real. I feel like everything everybody's saying sounds like stuff I've heard or have thought and things like that. And that's one of the things I like. And another thing that's hard about a movie that's kind of an ensemble piece is a movie's not long. This is less than 2 hours later. The characters don't have a lot of time to make an impression and distinguish themselves from each other. So what usually they do in most movies to do that is, to make characters based on stereotypes. Then you can just sort of tell them apart that way. And I mean, that works fine, especially for something like a slasher, because that characterization is not really important, right? It's like, there's the jock, there's the slut, there's the nerd, This movie's not like that. They're all similar, but, you have to go deeper to get what's different about them. And I think the movie does a really good job of that, considering, again, it's not like a super long movie. Not everyone's going to get a ton of screen time. I like how they all do come off as distinctive from each other, which I don't think is that easy to do in most movies. And in some movies, that's less important because, the plot's like some action thing or something else. But in this movie, the characters are everything. So it's a really difficult thing to do. So it's another reason why I really like the movie. I feel like Whit Stillman seems to have a really good grasp of people of a certain age or generation or something.
Dialogue's hard to write.
Yeah. I like to
I
think it's
suck
what
at it.
I'm good at. It's what I like to think I'm actually good at. One of my strengths as a writer, because everything I write is
Mhm,
dialogue heavy. I write the way like somebody like a Kevin Smith would, where there's a lot of
mhm.
dialogue in there. And again, I like Kevin Smith's dialogue, but it's the same thing as like what people sometimes call Buffy speak. I never watched the Buffy the Vampire Slayer show, but apparently they use a lot of weird slang and stuff that people don't really say in real life. But it's the type of thing is like, okay, nobody in real life says that, but I could kind of see people saying it, that
Mhm.
kind of thing. But this movie's not like that. So that's what makes it different to me from something like a Kevin Smith, something like that. And again, comedy is part of it, but it's not the whole thing. I also like the patience on some of the jokes because they don't just go right for a punchline. There's usually fairly long setups and going around it before something comes back again, which I think again is pretty hard to write and to act, I think.
Mhm.
But I mean, it stands out from other sort of disco movies like Saturday Night Fever is really about more like blue collar working class people. And the idea with them was disco was they're just out for a good time, hopefully to dance and maybe get laid or whatever. Whereas these are a different class of people. These are all Ivy League graduates, and they all see disco and the club as like a part of like the social structure and climbing the ladder and trying to get ahead in life. And they see acceptance into the club as a big goal. And also, whatever goals they have, they'll find there. Like the people they want to meet and date are in the club. The people they want to meet and, I don't know, network with professionally are in the club. So I like that distinction too. As
Mhm.
they say, they even point out at one point when they get kicked out and they get called yuppies. Dez or so, I think
Yeah.
Dez has that speech. He's just like, what is a yuppie anyway? And he says, whenever people talk about yuppies, nobody admits to being one. It's always the other guy. He says,
Yeah.
I think for a group to exist, somebody has to at least admit to being one. So yeah, there's a lot of analysis of things that I like because some of them I agree with, and some of them are just funny because I think they're kind of ludicrous. Like there's a lot of times where a character will like take some well-known thing and sort of dissect it or put their own spin on it, which I enjoy. I mean, other movies do that, but like they do a thing here with Lady and the Tramp, right? There's a whole part
Oh
where they
yeah.
talk about Lady Tramp being a good movie, but then one of them, I can't remember which one, basically attacks Lady and the Tramp for the values that it seems to teach children, which are not good at all if you really think of it. And I don't know. And
It's
Des
the
feels like he has to defend it on some level.
lawyer. Will, is
Oh,
that his name?
technically there's two lawyers. That's just why it's tough because there's the lawyer who she sleeps with at the beginning, and who's like the environmental lawyer, and then there's the young assistant DA. That is Josh, who she winds up with at the
Josh.
end.
Okay. And the guy at the beginning is the one who gave her the diseases, right?
Yeah. And the thing about Alice is, I guess she's the most sympathetic character in the movie, but I don't find her the most likable. I just feel bad for her because she's being mistreated by all the other characters so much through the movie. But I don't actually
Yeah.
find Alice herself likable. I find her kind of annoying, to tell you the truth. But
Hmm.
but she centers sort of as somewhat of a main character and who gets kind of a happy ending or whatever like that, which is all well and good. But I don't actually find her that likable. It's just more that you feel sorry for her because the other characters are mistreating her at every turn in one way or another.
Yeah.
Like the guy that, because it's funny. So you think about it. So she goes out in the very first night. She's heard that maybe Jimmy, the ad guy, will be there. She has like sort of a crush on Jimmy. She wants to meet Jimmy. Jimmy's having his own problems. He's trying to get his clients into the club. Doesn't work, and they're trying to like get him kicked out. Dez is doing his usual balancing act of getting people into the club and his dumping of women, Debs being the womanizer. And anyway, throughout the evening, she wants Jimmy, but she never really gets lined up with Jimmy. And then she runs into the lawyer Tom, who was sort of a second choice. And after having one of her many conversations with Charlotte, who is always condescending and rude to her, where Charlotte is basically telling her that, if you want to be more approachable and for guys to like you, you need to act, kind of like more sexy and stuff like that. So she says, like, use the word sexy, throw that into a sentence. And she tells her at one point, like, you come off kind of as a kindergarten or a kindergarten teacher or something like that.
Hmm.
So like she decides to be so blunt about using these things when she goes back with Tom to his place that at one point, like, he says, "Do you smoke?" And she's just like, "Well, I smoke when I'm drinking." And she goes, "I like to live dangerously, on the edge." And then she adds, like, "I'm no school." She's like, "I'm no like kindergarten teacher." And he's like,
Yeah.
"Okay." Then he starts talking about Uncle Scrooge and Karl Barks, which makes him cool in my book, regardless of what he
Right.
did. And he says, like, some people think of him as something as a genius. I absolutely do. And then she's just like, okay, whatever, I'll go for it. And she also shows her hypocrisy because twice she points out, not just to Charlotte, but then later talking to other guy, that one of the things that annoyed her about college was she didn't like, apparently, that certain guys she met wanted her to admit that the guy who did Spider-Man was a serious writer. Like, that was so important to her that she uses it twice. And you know what my response would have been? Well, which guy? There was more than one guy. Which guy do you mean? But anyway, she throws all that out the window. So she says, actually, I guess I always found Uncle Scrooge sexy. And he's like, really? And then he puts on the music, makes it very clear he wants her, and they go into the bedroom, and obviously they have sex. Then you think, like, later in the movie, when he talks to her again, and this is before she finds out she's even gotten anything from him, he admonishes her for letting him have sex with her. It's so bizarre. Can you imagine? He tells her that he's doing this trial separation with his longtime girlfriend, but the idea was, okay, we're in trial separation. We'll try to see each other. So, I mean, see other people, see how that works. And he said, when I saw you, I was taken in by, like, how innocent you were and pure. And the idea was, like, the fact that she let him sleep with her ruined the whole thing. And he says, I'm like, what the hell was that? Like, Uncle Scrooge is sexy? Like, how dumb do you think I am? Like, he turns it all around on her. Like, she did something bad to him by
Right.
having sex with him because it ruined his, like, pure image of her. Like, I can just imagine, like, how that would feel to have somebody turn around and say that to you. And then you get the double whammy of, one, not only was that out of character for her, she never had sex before. So that was her, that's how she lost her virginity. And two, of course, the fact that he gave her gonorrhea and herpes. So I can just imagine.
G and H.
Yeah. Yeah. So he said, oh, and they give you a G and H infection. She's like, H? Because, yeah, that one doesn't go away.
So he knew he had it. So he's just a piece of shit.
Yeah. And yet he does try to deny it at first, too. Because he's just like, well, you've been with other guys. No, as it turns out, no. And I like how she isn't even really sure. She's like, she's been with other guys, but they never actually did the deed. He's like, well, what if he comes and there's no penetration? He's like, well, then that's not doing it. She's like, then it's you. He's like, oh shit.
Yeah, was she trying to say that like dudes were what do you call it? Premature ejaculation, or she just like blew a bunch of dudes or something?
Yeah, I think she's just trying to say that probably she was in some sexual situation and the guy just, I don't know, maybe being inexperienced like her, just it happened before they even did anything. I mean, I've heard of that.
Whoops.
I've never done that, but I've heard of that. So I'm told this is the thing that could happen.
I've heard this is a thing that exists.
But I would, no actual experience. No, of course not. But yeah, so throughout the most of the movie, she's just being like, I mean, the whole thing is like, is that she and Charlotte weren't ever really friends. They just wound up working at the same place. Because then you find out later, like when Charlotte originally is talking to her in the club in the first night, and she's saying, it was unfair. Everybody hated you back in college, and she's like, they did. She's like, don't worry. I will make sure. She's like, I don't see why history should repeat. And she's like, why would history repeat? And you find out it's all because of Charlotte. She's because later Charlotte admits, she's like, well, I really didn't like you. And
Yeah.
I made other people not like you. And I told guys not to go out with you. Like, Charlotte's like a real piece of work. But I just love Kate Beckinsale. Watch it. And I could just watch the whole movie of Kate Beckinsale, 1998 Kate Beckinsale dancing to disco. She's always wearing something backless. I want to see those shoulders.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yep.
But their dynamic, I think, is really great because then she's talking about, well, we're not going to get anywhere until we get an apartment. She's like, should we live together? We don't know each other that well. I don't even think we really like each other. And Charlotte's like, well, that's not important. She's like, that's not important. Which, again, to me, seems very realistic. I think a lot of people coming out of college and stuff like that are forced into these situations. They don't really have a best friend or a great person to rely on to be a roommate. It's just sort of whoever is available. I mean, a lot of people wind up being roommates with people like because they put an ad in the paper and that's how they meet. So at least they had some past history. Although, as it's revealed, it turns out like Charlotte was actually mean to her, which she didn't know, telling people she sucked and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the constant, her being the sympathetic character the whole time. Alice was kind of got annoying, but
Well, I mean, it got annoying for me just because at the end of the day, while I felt bad for her being mistreated, I still didn't really like her. Like, I didn't think she was terrible or a bitch or anything like
but
that.
I mean, she's going out with these people that treat her like shit. I mean, that's on her, isn't it? I
Hey,
mean,
I mean, that's the other thing. Like, I think none of these people see that there's other options. Really, it has
mhm,
something to do with the class they were in. They all went to Ivy League schools, and now they
mhm,
all. This is just the world they know. It's what they expect. Like, this is the club they're going to. These are the clothes they're going to wear, and they're going to try their best to. And it's interesting because the guys, while they're at lower levels, they are in something of the upper, the lawyers and ad companies and stuff, stuff where if you can get higher, you'll make a lot of money and you'll be in a higher class. The girls work at a publishing company, which is lower, but it's almost like it's more acceptable because at the end of the day, something like I got something like at the end of the day, but somebody like Charlotte is just so attractive that she just expects things to work out for her. She basically
mhm.
says that at the end of the movie. She talks about how
Well,
she's
it's
confident that she'll work just fine in television. She has no reason to think she'll fail because
yeah,
she's just one of those pretty girls that people like and
that
tell her what she wants to hear and
right,
do what she wants. So
right.
even though at the beginning she has like a low level job that doesn't pay much or have much prospects, she never worries about it because she just thinks things have always worked out for me. They will continue to work out for me, type thing.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that's really what she is in this, Jake, as you pointed out. It does. I do sympathize with her, but it doesn't make me like her, I guess, because I'm just like it's definitely wrong the way almost all these characters treat her, from Charlotte and her weird passive aggressiveness to just outright aggressiveness, to the guy that uses her as some sort of rebound experiment and then actually in the process gives her two gives her, as he says, two infections, and then admonishes her and makes it sound like it's her fault that it happened and he's disappointed in her from some moral standpoint. Then there's Dez, who she dates somewhat casually for kind of no reason, just because he's there, I guess. I guess Dez doesn't really do anything mean to her, but at the same time, it's not like he's really emotionally available or anything like that. They just sort
Hmm.
of wind up dating just because they're in the same circle. Um, and then she's just sort of ignored by some of the other characters. It's funny, like Jimmy was the one she'd been focused on, and Jimmy himself just sort of ignores her. And when he first meets her, he remarks to Des that she's kind of annoying, and she didn't even do anything annoying yet. So
Yeah.
like he said, he offered to go get her a drink, and then he's like, "Oh, you gotta get this drink for this girl. She's kind of annoying." It's like she said like two words to you, dude. So yeah. In the end, Jimmy winds up sort of the punching bag, and I feel bad in a way because he might be the one I kind of identify with the most. It's sort of roulette how I identify with different characters at different times, but maybe
Hmm.
when it's all said and done, I might relate to Jimmy the most. But by the end, it's almost kind of like Jimmy's a loser and he can go to Spain and he sucks. I'm like, what did Jimmy do? Now it's not entirely Jimmy's fault that he didn't wind up with Alice. Maybe he shouldn't have. And yeah, the relationship with Charlotte didn't work out, but he didn't do anything terrible in it or anything. Yeah. So I felt kind of bad that by the end, like Des is like, oh, I wind up it's a good thing I didn't wind up going to Spain with an idiot like Jimmy. I'm like, I'm like, poor fucking Jimmy. What'd he do? What'd he do, Des? Whereas Des is like a whirlwind of destruction. He's somewhat self-aware, which is kind of what's funny about it. He's one of those people that knows like the damage he does and how he's messed up, and he can come to terms with it at some times, and then other times he can just be in complete denial as he goes forward. It's pretty funny.
Hmm.
Because there's often
Yeah.
times
He's
where he'll talk about like, because that's what he says. He says like when he's in the car with Jimmy, he says, that Shakespeare line, "To thine own self to be true." Like, how's that work if like your own self like isn't very good? And he's like, I'm not really happy with who I am myself. And then later he has the turnaround when he talks to Charlotte, where they're both completely happy with who they are themselves. Right? It's like we're both just two big personalities for these other people to handle, and I don't really think stuff like monogamy works for us either, because then there's no point in going out. She's like, right, and what kind of life would that be? So I don't know. I don't think they get together at the end, but they both just sort of like validate each other's sort of, I don't want to say shallowness, but whatever that is. She's like, you know what? I agree with you. And they both feel a lot better about themselves and have pretty much learned nothing through through their
right.
trials and tribulations, which is funny. Oh, I had a bit of the thing that Josh says about Lady and the Tramp. Yeah, he 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 says that the movie promotes an unrealistic and self-destructive view towards relationships with the opposite sex, imprinting on their little psyches the idea of the smooth talking delinquents recently escaped from the local pound are a good match for the nice girls from the sheltered homes. And then like Des comes to his defense towards the end, maybe feeling a little taxed. He says, "What isn't the whole point that he changes?" And then Josh has this whole thing. He's like, "Well, I don't really think people change that much," which maybe they
Because
do.
Dez is the tramp, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's also some good lines about that too. I remember if it was Josh or somebody else talking. It was like, "I've always respected you, except when it comes to your relations with women." Like it's like everybody knows, like he treats women terribly. Like it's not some secret, and he seems shocked that people know it. This whole thing being he meets them at the club since he works at the club, has dalliances with them. When it turns into like a real relationship, he like dumps them and then says, "Oh, I have discovered I'm gay," to try to get sympathy.
Yeah.
We see this at first with Jennifer Beals, who would
You know,
pop
there's a
in
lot
later.
of stuff like that you couldn't get away with now. Like that part and pretending to be gay, and then the part where Charlotte says that she can tell if someone's gay by looking at their, in their eyes.
Yeah, and that's when he says, "Well, were Jimmy or I gay?" And she's like, "Jimmy, no, you have a gay mouth." He's like, "What does that even mean?" Like, which is a good point. Like, either I'm gay or I'm not. I guess it's just my mouth that's gay. Like, and she doesn't explain, which I
Yeah.
don't know. Just reminds me of the type of thing a lot of pretty girls say. I love so much of Charlotte's dialogue, and I mean, you've got this cast of characters that all they all went to Ivy League schools. So regardless of
Mhm.
whatever they accomplish, they all feel like they're pretty smart. They definitely feel like they're smarter than other people, and they definitely feel like they're smarter than they actually are. Like at one point early on, Charlotte says to Alice, like she says, "Alice, one of the things I've noticed about people is they don't like being criticized." As if that's some sort of like clever epiphany.
Right.
Like Charlotte often makes observations that are just obvious common sense, and she acts like she's made some sort of like clever breakthrough, which is pretty
Hmm.
funny. But yeah, there wow, that was scary. Did you hear that?
Yeah. I don't know what's going on.
I hope you're still safe. I hope you're in a safe
I
place.
hope it. Let's hope my mic didn't pick it up.
Yeah, a little bit at least from my end. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, it's just a bunch of characters that seem to think that they have like maybe they're smarter than everybody around them, and some of them are a little bit smarter, but they definitely have like a false sense of how smart they are, and it really
Hmm.
comes across in the dialogue, which I really enjoy a lot. And I mean, I really like that, and sometimes I think Dez is smarter than he realizes he is, and it's just like he just doesn't want to confront it because like that whole thing about like the money. He goes down and shows Jimmy the money, and he's just like, I don't know what to do about this. And he's just like, to me, shipping cash to Switzerland in canvas bags doesn't sound legal. It's like you think, but he has like no follow up on this. It's like I don't know what to make of it or do with it or think about it. It's pretty. I don't know. They all have good moments like that. I mean, at one point, when she's walking with Tom before she goes back to his apartment and has sex with him, and she asks him how he got into like the environmentalism part of being a lawyer. It's like, I
Hmm.
don't know. It's just become sort of a thing that people care about. And he says one of the theories is that the environmentalism movement got started because of a re-release of Bambi in the 50s. And he said like a whole bunch of the baby boom generation of kids went to see that movie being so traumatized by Bambi's death that everybody wanted to distance themselves from what they saw as the opposite side of that, like the hunter, and that began the environmentalism movement. I mean, that's not completely stupid, but again, it's kind of the type of thing that people like this might say, which
Yeah.
I don't know. I like. I feel like I've had conversations somewhat similar to this with like college people. As I said, I went to like I mean, I didn't go to an Ivy League school, but I went to a very snobby school steeped in tradition. So I know, and again, most of the people there, if they weren't journalism students like me, they were there for FIP and things. So that their whole thing was philosophy, So they wanted to talk to me about.
Oh yeah.
So we were all having rambling conversations about Kant and Adam Smith and Socrates and all these things, right? So I know all about like just how pretentious and these things can turn out. And this is only the smaller end of it because these are types of more sort of white collar people. They go to business school and things like that, so they can or law school, so they can get those
It's a
sorts of
bunch of
high-paying jobs.
yuppies arguing that they're not yuppies.
Right. And at one point, like I said, when Des is talking about it, he's like young, upwardly mobile professional. He's like, aren't these good things? Aren't these things we should aspire to? I wish I was.
I
It's
didn't
true.
even know that's what it stood for.
Yeah. My favorite expression is probably dink, which is like a yuppie, but they're double income, no kids. So they're not rich, but they make a lot of money because they don't have kids and they both have pretty high paying jobs.
Yep. The whole premise of Idiocracy.
Yeah.
We're just not ready yet. And then
See, I enjoy the shallowness of this because again, I don't feel like it's overstated or going too far. I feel like there's just like the right amount of it. Because I don't think any of the characters are stupid. I don't think any of them are idiots. Not even Charlotte. I think Charlotte still has some brains. It's just once again a case of people sort of overestimating their own intelligence or their own sort of experience or view of the world. They're like, I think I've figured things out, which does happen to a lot of
yeah.
people. Like at some point in their 20s, they're like, okay, I've been out in the real world a couple years. I get it now. I know how things work. I'm ahead of the curve on this one.
Yeah. 23. I think I've got it all,
Exactly.
all under wraps.
It's funny that like people talk about, they say, oh, when you're 18, you think you know everything. I don't know. When I was 18, I felt that moment, I was like, again, that's when I started college. So I was like, I'm ready to learn, pour it into me. So it really, I do feel it's more like 22, 23. You're like, okay, now I get it. I've lived a couple years on my own, maybe, although probably still with support from my parents. I maybe graduated and got a degree or something, and now I've got it all figured out. So I feel like that's much more applicable than saying like 18 or 19-year-olds who think they know everything. Although, I mean, some people that just applies no matter what age they are, of course. That's just who they are. They think they know. They just think they know better than people.
Right.
That's probably the kind of character Charlotte is. She's
Mm-hmm.
narcissistic and shallow, and yet at certain times she does show a certain amount of self-awareness. She says, she goes like, Alice, I'm not nearly as much of a bitch as I might appear to be, and that's I think a half truth. I think that's at least partially true. So I think all the characters, for the most part, do have at least a certain sense of self-awareness, which makes
That's
it again a bit more realistic. But I mean, this movie was overshadowed by other movies like that. I mean, this is the same year that 54 came out, and even though 54 did not do well and was kind of savaged by critics, it's the big one that everyone remembers and talks about. And I guess that because it had more to do with the business. 54 was about the club itself and sort of the business.
Yeah.
This touches on the business, but again, it's sort of about these group of people, the clientele more so, which I like more. I really hated 54. I kind of hated every second of that movie.
It's kind of like the polar opposite of this movie. Like it's all about flash and style, and and it really showcases the period piece aspect and the cocaine is everywhere. I mean, there's one time he pulls out a bag at the very end of cocaine. That's the only time it's ever really even mentioned.
Yeah. Well, before that, that off screen Des has been doing a bit, and they talk about it a little bit. Yeah, it is,
but it's not front and center,
right? And it's more subtle too. Like you don't see him going wild-eyed and crazy either, because a lot of people, some people did do that, but a lot of people, it was more like what Des was doing. He was holding it together. Like it wasn't going well for him, but he was holding things together. And he must have been good at his job.
Myers.
Yeah.
Think of Mike Myers in 54. Like,
yeah,
he's like, Liberace on crack or whatever,
I think anybody can remember that movie. It's just like him with like Ryan Phillippe, and just out of nowhere, like Mike Myers goes, "I want to suck your cock," and you're like, "Whoa, welcome to club life."
That's my favorite part of that movie.
Yeah. But yeah, the club in this movie is probably somewhat based on 54, although a little toned down because it's not like it's full of movie stars. But it's obviously a very upscale club that's hard to get into. I've always enjoyed the dynamic. I've always enjoyed the idea of clubs like that have that rule of cool. Because usually if you're in most businesses, you want to let people in, especially if there's a cover charge. But the idea of a club is we don't want to let everybody in. We want to make it so that sometimes you can't get in and some people can't get in because it makes it all the more appealing to try to get in and want to get in, and it helps our mystique. And this whole idea that certain people just don't belong in the club. Like I know, for instance, they wouldn't let me in that club. They just wouldn't have, and I wouldn't have wanted to go anyway. I wasn't going to put on a suit and go to that club. But I don't know. It's interesting at the start where they show what's that guy's name? the jerk at the club that's always sort of in conflict with Dez. Hold on.
Oh, the guy working the front door.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know his name.
that's gonna bother me.
Victor.
Bernie's the owner, but it's not Bernie. It's one of the guys that works for Bernie, and I can't
Is it
think of his
Victor?
name. No.
No, I'm not sure.
Anyway, that guy, because he's the one, because you see him like scanning the crowd, deciding who comes in and out, and like at a moment towards the beginning, Charlotte and Alice stop and see the crowd, and they're like, "Wow, this place has gotten hard to get into," but they still get in probably because of how glamorous Charlotte is. Because that's one thing where socioeconomic background doesn't matter. Pretty girls, you're always going to want those in your club, and obviously in 1998, Kate Beckinsale's a knockout, so they go right in. But speaking to the whole thing about appearances too, she says at one point, again, one of her weird condescending backhanded things, she says, physically maybe I'm a little cuter than you, but you're such a great person. You should be much more popular than me. Yeah. But just that whole idea of clubs and how they have the right to not let people in if they don't want to. And I guess that is a kind of freedom in a way. It's a free society that allows a club to have its own rules about who gets in and who gets out. But at the same time, excluding people feels like the opposite of that. I've always just found that's a weird kind of dichotomy because it speaks to the freedom of the society we live in that a club is allowed to set those rules. But at the same time, those are rules of exclusion, which seems kind of weird. Because when Dez says like to Jimmy, I gotta get you out of here, kick you out, and he says, why? He's just like, and he says, what's his name? Bernie doesn't want ad people in the club. He goes, what? This is like the Nazis or something like that. He goes, this is like out of the Nazis. And I mean, that's obviously a big overreaction. But on this other side, I kind of get where he's coming from. I'm an ad person, so I can't be in the club. And he says it later when they unmask him when they got him wearing the costume. And he goes, so I work in advertising. What's happened to this country? And again, I kind of agree. And I absolutely adore Bernie's explanation for it because it fits his character. But at the beginning of the movie, you don't really know his character except he's probably kind of a jerk. I just love it so much because at the beginning, Dez says, well, why don't you want him here? And he says, no, that's Jimmy Steinway. I don't want him in the club or any of his ad people. And he said, I don't want ad people in the club. And he's like, well, why? What's wrong with them? And he says, that my first job, I worked in advertising. And the next thing you probably expect him to say is like, they're all just a bunch of morons or they're a bunch of assholes or something like that, right? Instead, what he says, when I started advertising, the thing to do was to be nice to everybody. Be nice to the art department. Be nice to the secretaries. Be nice to blah, blah, blah. And he goes, I don't want that element in the club. Which is hilarious. This idea, and even before he finishes that part, Dez says, well, I don't think that's what it's like now. Doesn't matter. To Bernie, the idea was like the ad people have begun some sort of unnatural and unholy thing where people are nice to each other, and he can't stand it. He doesn't want it in his club because the club is not for people being nice to each other, which is very true. Clubs are not about people being nice. But I just love that. He's like, I don't want that element in the club. So funny.
Is the whole purpose to like just let in like hot chicks and not a lot of guys?
Yeah, let in hot chicks and not a lot of guys, and the guys that get in are guys that have deep pockets. Yeah, so they can buy the drinks for the pretty girls, and around and around it goes.
So they're probably tossing some money at the bouncer there at the door, probably, right?
Yeah, that's the other thing. They talk about the club having a cover charge. Like, are people also bribing their way in and then paying a cover charge? And then there's certain people that never do pay a cover charge because there's another part of how clubs work, right? Well, certain people, we won't make them pay a cover charge. Even at one point where and it's weird that it's Jimmy of all people to say this, but when Dez takes Jimmy downstairs to show him all that money and he talks about the cover charge, Jimmy goes, oh, paying cover charge at club. How embarrassing. I'm like, Jimmy, you're not some rock star, so I don't know who you think you are. Like, you're only in the club because you're in disguise, and they don't want you in there. So it's kind of funny. He's acting like it's embarrassing that people actually have to pay to get in. And another thing I do like about Jimmy though is like he does seem somewhat. Again, it's a self-awareness thing because for some reason there's a lot of pressure on him to bring clients to the club. That's what he's trying to do at the start, right? And it doesn't fly, it doesn't work, and he's feeling really bad about it. I'll get back to that. But then later, when he comes back, when he's in disguise, he's talking to Des. He's like, "Well, can you talk to Birdie and try to smooth things over and fix this situation, so that he will let me in?" And I love what he says. He says, "It's a question of groveling. I can do that. Just point me in the right direction." So I mean, I give him credit for that. He knows where he stands, and he's not above groveling if it'll help him out, which I think is really good.
Yeah, Jimmy's the one who loses his job, right?
Yeah,
He gets fired. So he's
not the
cover
only one.
charge.
They all pretty much lose their jobs.
Right.
Because Dez loses his job because the club goes under. Jimmy loses his job because of I don't know, Wall Street shenanigans, which is another thing they sort of touch about, right? It's the beginning of the '80s. This is going to become a big thing, right? Like white collar crime and all that stuff that I don't understand at all. But all those sorts of financial crimes and fraud and embezzlement and all those things.
Like
that's going to be
insider trading, stuff like
yeah.
that.
That's all going to blow up in the '80s, right? So this is like they're showing like the start of it. The girls lose their jobs because I think their publishing company gets bought by some other thing and they get fired. And Josh gets fired kind of in a nice way because he was working on the case against the club. And he talked about how of course, he had a conflict because he knew somebody that worked at the club. And they said, "No, we worked that out. It's okay. It's not a conflict." But then he goes back and says, "No, now it's a real conflict because we both like the same girl," because he wants Alice at the same time that Des is dating her. And again, I don't think that's a problem. But then they say, well, and Des says, like, "Wait a minute, that case was a big success and you were a big part of it. So why'd you get fired?"
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, well, they didn't like how I gave preferential treatment to someone involved," meaning obviously he protected Des. He protected Des. So in the end, they're all pretty much unemployed, all the major characters. In fact, at the end, it shows them walking out of, I think, the unemployment office is where they're walking from.
Yeah, they show it a couple times in the movie, the unemployment office.
It's a good sort of microcosm, again, of sort of the 70s crashing into the 80s. These were people that enjoyed some good times, and now, and this seems to have sort of happened every decade. It's more like the end of a decade and the start of a decade. It's not necessarily, oh, the 60s were great and then the 70s were bad. The 70s were great and then the 80s were bad. There's just always a weird, rough transition period, and there's always casualties of it. Is more, I think, how it is. Because these were people that were young in the 70s. And really, when Josh gives his like heartfelt speech towards the end about disco, so it's like the club's gone. Haven't you heard? Like, disco's dead. It sucks. People aren't going. And he gives this big speech about how disco will never really die. And it was great, and it was a movement. And even if for a few years people are going to make fun of it, it'll always be good and blah, blah, blah. Like, you can dress that up all you want, and I'm not saying he's not sincere, but I mean, the movie is really just sort of saying, like, the end, what we've come to is that they were young. And that's sort of ending in a way. The characters believe the disco period was the most wonderful period of their lives. But it wasn't really disco that was the special thing. It was their youth themselves. They danced, they drank, they fell in love, they learned things. And the music of the time will always be there to reawaken and reignite those emotions. Every generation goes through it. And that's really what it's like. It's about sort of like, it's not like youth is entirely ending. They're still pretty young, but it's still a chapter of youth is closing. And disco was just their chapter, is really what it was.
What's those nostalgia goggles? I think we all have it for our childhood. We remember things being better than they probably actually are.
For sure. And the older I get, the better it looks.
Yeah. Compared to now, man, like, fuck, everything's in the toilet. All the, the music sucks.
Yeah.
Movies, I mean, suck for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, I've completely lost track of music. And the thing that bothers me the most is, like, at least even in my lifetime and before my lifetime, there was always sort of like counterbalance. There was, there was what was popular, and then there was like stuff that was less popular, but still resonate with a lot of people. The obvious one is like you have pop music, like big fancy pop music, and then you have like rock and roll, like that. Like there is no rock and roll anymore. What's a big band now? Who's a big band? Like who plays Coachella? Like Coachella's all like hip hop and pop
like
and dance.
Nicki Minaj or somebody like that, or
like
Cardi B or some shit.
See, when I was growing up, there was all those stars too. There was big pop and hip hop and dance stars, and I'm not saying anything against them. I'm just saying they were that. But I had all these bands that they were for me that I liked instead. But those kids that grow up now with those sensibilities, like who do they like? Imagine Dragons. That's like the biggest band I can think of now.
I'll have to ask my kids because they listen to current music that I can't tolerate it. But like Taylor Swift or something, I mean that's
probably... I mean, again, it's like she's so far from, I don't know.
But I mean, I'm trying to think of a band that's even still performing. Like I know they're out there, but
Yeah.
like
The biggest
Maroon
band I
5 or
can think
something.
of
No?
is like Imagine Dragons, and then they may not even be big anymore. But that's just like the one name I heard the last like 3 or 4 years, like a band, not a solo artist, but a
Mhm.
band, some guys with guitars. I don't even know
Yeah.
what they sound like. I think they sound okay. They're not really my thing from what I hear, but but I mean, where are the others? Aren't there others? Like everything has
It's
just
all
become,
pop now, I think.
it's all
Everything
pop.
is pop. Like
Yeah.
country music has turned into pop. Rock and roll's turned into pop.
Yeah, so I just wonder about those kids that like that's not their thing. Do they just go back and listen to the old stuff? Is that what they do? Are they listening to like classic rock because there is no like current rock for their generation? There is, I mean, I know there's bands out there, but I mean they're so unsuccessful, obviously.
Yeah. Well, contradicting what I said earlier, I mean, there is good music out there. You just have to really search for it. Like it's not, there is no MTV now, and the radio only plays, the top, pop songs or whatever. So
Hmm.
you really have to go and just listen to a bunch of stuff to find new artists. I mean, they're out there. I found some.
Yeah. Because I mean, during this movie, we hear all the disco, but obviously we know there was plenty of rock music going on at the time as like sort of a counter to it, part of that sort of disco sucks movement, whether they, whether they actively contributed to it or not. Yeah, and I
Mhm.
mean that's fine. I always expect that to be like the mainstream, but as I said, when you had big pop and hip hop, like say in the '90s, there was still a strong undercurrent of rock that was maybe not quite as popular, but still very popular. You had bands like Smashing Pumpkins; they sold millions of records,
Right.
and they weren't the only
Like,
ones.
when's the last time you bought a new album? Like, like just came out?
Well, actually, like really recently, but that's because it was
Oh,
Moist.
really?
But if you take that off the table, like forever ago.
It's been a
Like
while for
forever.
me.
Like forever. But no, Moist just released an album in January, and I only bought it digitally. I don't have it on CD yet. I'll try to find the CD because I want to. But if you take that out of the equation, a long, long, long time.
I don't buy music anymore, and it's really sad. But I mean, a lot of that stuff's not even readily available anymore. Like you can't go to the store and find an album you want. That they may have a handful of selections, but you
I've
need to
got a
look up.
pretty decent place in Sunrise. But the only albums I've been buying there in the last couple of years is I've been quietly putting together my CD collection of the Beatles. They're
Is that a
expensive.
is that a music store?
Yeah, it's Sunrise Records. It's mostly a music
That's
store, but
cool.
they sell a lot of movies and stuff too.
That's cool. Those are few and far between, from what I
They
hear.
have a cool section of like the kind of movies that we look at, like a lot of like niche movies and collector's editions. That's where I got my really not my like 3 disc edition of The Thing, for instance. Like I paid through the nose for it. Oh my god, it cost a lot, but at least it's there. Like they'll have a section and you could buy like Blood and Black Lace or something, like a
That's
giallo or
cool.
something, which is pretty cool. But it's not cheap, but at least it's
Like
there. It's not easy to
all
get
of
to though.
my
It's out in the big mall. I have to cross the bridge over to Dartmouth to get there. I might go there
all
next
of
week
my
just to see what's going on.
my local record stores have been gone for nearly 20 years now.
Yeah.
And then all the Sam Goodies and the big what would you call those, franchise stores or whatever, the
Yeah.
chains, they've been gone for probably 10 years. So we
Oh
don't
yeah,
have
they're all
any.
gone here too. Sunrise actually replaces the last HMV we had. HMV being one of the chain record stores in Canada. And Sunrise, I was really excited to get it because it existed in Canada, but out west there was never one out here. So that's pretty cool. It's the only one. It's the only one, not just in Halifax. It's the only one like in Atlantic, Canada, probably. Probably you have to go to like Montreal to go to another one. And yeah, one thing that was great. I always think about like I've lived not completely full time because I didn't live here full time my first like 2 years because I lived on campus and came home in the summers. But I've lived in Halifax for close to 20 years now. And
Mhm.
it's so different now from when I moved here, especially downtown, because downtown had so many great stores that I love that are gone. Used bookstores
Mhm.
gone, used record stores gone, just new record stores, of course, gone. Game
Gosh.
stores gone. All that stuff that I like it's not the type of thing you buy that way anymore, right? It's all
Mhm.
streaming digital
Online.
content.
Yeah.
So those stores that I loved and perused so much when I was younger, gone. And I mean, they're not coming back. There's still the odd used bookstore around, but Halifax used to have like a dozen, like within walking distance of me.
Yeah. That sucks, man. There's something about that tangible aspect of it that I know it sounds
Yeah,
so stupid. I sound like I'm an old man, yelling at the sky, but
I don't know.
it's something different, about having to wait a week to watch your favorite show, or going to the record store, buying a record, having it in your hand. It's just something
Yeah.
different. I don't know. I feel like it maybe makes the experience more meaningful.
I think so. I even said something like this years ago, and and this was when it was still going on. When I started collecting vinyl a little bit, I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this. I'm sure a lot of people have said this. That's not like something so profound, but I remember we had gone to the record store, and that still exists because it's an institution. I mean, record, like it's primarily a vinyl place,
Right.
right? Anyway, I don't go there anymore because I can't just spend $30 on a record I can't even play. I can play it technically, but I don't have good speakers. But
Mm.
anyway, this is when I first started, when I was living in my first apartment with my sister and my friend Shane, and he had a record store. So we started going and buying records. And we especially love buying the little 45s because
Yeah.
you get lots of cool hits and stuff. And I remember putting on different ones like, I don't know, like 1963 and things like that. And I remember at one point where we were sort of just talking about the appeal. We were sort of talking about the appeal of vinyl. And I think I said something like, it's one, and this is, of course, before iTunes and stuff comes in and everything's
Right.
digital. So at the time, it was still normal to pop a CD in at this
Yeah.
time because it's like 2003 or something. And I said something like, well, it's one thing, to pop a CD in somewhere, but like playing a record is like an event. And I really think
Yeah.
that's true. Like, because there's such a ritual to it. You pull it
The
out and
the whole process.
you
Yeah.
put it down, you, to make the needle go down and everything like it. There's a ritual to it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people, not just us, like people that make films. We talk about this before. It shows up all the time in a lot of horror movies and stuff, especially. It's just a love of all things analog. You'll have a character that even though it's like 2018, they have like a Walkman because they like showing them taking the tape and putting the tape in, and that kind of stuff. Analog stuff it's just much better visually for a movie anyway. It's more satisfying to see something get put in, clicked, turned on, instead of just going, Siri, play.
It's that easy now.
Because that's what it is now. Yeah, you walk into your home and you're putting your groceries away, and you go, "Yo, Siri, play Sick Beats," and they do.
Play Anaconda by Nicki Minaj.
Yeah, I want to get all horny while I put my groceries away, or whatever the fuck it is.
Yeah. I hate that. Whatever that
Is Anaconda
fucking
supposed to be
music
like
is.
an unofficial sequel to Baby Got Back?
She uses some lines from that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's how I saw it. It's like it's a spiritual successor. It's like the other side of it. It's like the woman's side. Like, good for you, Nikki, I guess.
That's the role models for our growing generation.
I know, eh? And I mean, I think we're pretty laid back about this stuff. I don't want to censor anybody or anything like that. But
I
like I
didn't.
said, a couple of years ago, even I was shocked by like how like slutty the halftime show
It's
was at the
yeah.
Super Bowl, where it was like
Oh, it
Shakira and
was
somebody, maybe Jennifer
Jennifer
Lopez.
Lopez. Yeah.
I was like, holy shit, this is sexual. I was
Yeah.
like, I can't believe you've gotten back to this after the whole world blew up because
Right.
of, Janet Jackson's nipple. I thought we'd never see anything on this level again, but they're like, this is what the kids like. They like a 45-year-old J-Lo grinding it or whatever.
She's 50 something.
Yeah, still looks pretty good. Give her credit. Speaking of which, and like I said, I talk about 1998 Kate Beckinsale. 2022 Kate Beckinsale is pretty darn good. I give her credit. She's aged
She's
spectacularly.
getting close to 50. What,
Yeah,
73 she was born?
I think so. Because
72,
I
73,
remember she
something
did
that.
like the last Underworld movie in like 2016, and she looked almost exactly as she did in 2003 in the first one. Like it looked like no time had passed, and that's like 15 years almost. Okay,
Yeah.
more like 12 years. My math is off, but you know what I mean. Still, a significant amount of time had passed.
It's crazy to like look at like say Kate Beckinsale at 50 and then look at like Nancy Reagan at 50. like Nancy Reagan was elderly for like 100 years, She
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a few other examples of that too, but it's crazy.
Yeah. Apparently Beckinsale, I'm trying to remember how she got into the movie. She sent like an audition tape. She heard of it or something.
She's so young, I almost didn't even recognize her.
Yeah. Beckinsale, who was living in England at the time, mailed an audition tape to Stillman. He was immediately mesmerized and cast her to the role of Charlotte. And what's funny is
Another
Chloe Sevigny basically got cast in the one I mentioned, Girls Don't Cry, because of this movie, apparently. The director of that liked her in this movie, particularly the end part where she's just dancing, which is kind of funny.
Did she play the girlfriend of
Yeah, I think so.
the main character?
Yeah.
Can't think of her name.
Hilary Swank. Hilary
yeah,
Swank's character. What is it? Brandon Tina?
Brandon, yeah.
Yeah.
Shoot, I was going to say something. Oh yeah. Yeah, I think of Kate Beckinsale, like Vacancy. I watched that recently. That's a good movie.
It's okay, I guess. That's her and Luke Wilson. I guess that's not what. I guess I think of Underworld first.
Underworld, yeah.
I've
never been a big fan of those. I've seen a few of them, but
they're a big part of that whole early 2000s, stuff that really the Matrix set the template for, right? It's like bullet time and skin tight leather and like new metal.
Resident Evil was like that too.
So from like 99 with the Matrix into about probably 2007, 2008. We've talked about that era before, as we said, about eras. There's always eras and they overlap with each other. This is the last days of disco. And as we said, it's less about the era itself and just what it is to come to terms with being part of something and realizing its ending, and also realizing that you are getting older and that you're not young anymore, or whatever.
The character of, find his name here. We haven't mentioned Dan yet either, I don't think.
Right. So Dan is the one who's a little different from the other guys because he's not like the yuppie that the others are. He actually works in the publishing place with the girls. And unlike the guys, his aspirations lie more in that. Like he'd like to be, I think, a writer or something in publishing, something more academic. And he's an academic. So he thinks of himself as smart too. And he's probably right. He's probably on another level from these other ones in a way. But yeah, Dan. But he also winds up sort of getting swept up by it because when they're talking about how like, because he's saying like it doesn't matter that you girls work here or whatever because you guys talk about how you're struggling to pay rent. It's like it doesn't matter. In a few years you'll marry like rich corporate lawyers, whatever, do whatever money she wants. And Charlotte flips it around and she goes, well, what if we were to, not do that and marry somebody with low socioeconomic prospects such as yourself? And he's just like, I can't believe you guys think that way. And then as they leave, he goes, disco sucks. But then later, because he hooks up with Holly, he decides to give the whole club scene a chance because why not? We have a hot girl like Holly.
Did you ever watch Silicon Valley?
No.
Dan, the guy, the actor that plays Dan, is like the main protagonist in that.
Oh, okay.
Good show though. You'd probably like it.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the.
I mean, I know what it is. I've heard of it. Yeah.
It's great.
They call him Departmental Dan. His name is Matt Ross.
Yeah. But I wanted to mention Josh.
He was also an American Psycho. That's funny. He was an American Psycho too. That's funny.
Josh is an interesting character because he goes on and on about how he's suffering with depression and he's on lithium, which has terrible side effects.
Now this is early 80s. Maybe they didn't know.
Yeah. Probably the onset of those drugs coming out.
This is the same time where like Quaaludes were just everywhere because doctors were prescribing them. Like it wasn't like it was passing them around in back rooms. It was like Quaaludes, this will do for you. And people were like, you know what's fantastic? Drinking alcohol while on Quaaludes. That's like what everybody did in the 70s and at least the first half of the 80s.
Oh, that and like Fen was a big thing. That was basically just a bunch of amphetamines they would give people to lose weight.
Yeah. So, and the funny thing about that was like, at a certain point earlier in the 60s and probably early 70s, there were people that would never do drugs. And they saw like the seedy side of drug culture. But then there'd be all these people doing stuff like that because they're like, well, it's good for me and the doctor prescribed it. So it became a whole thing.
It's similar to like the opioid crisis, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, they gave me this, you gave me these 80 milligram Oxycontins and now I'm addicted. You took them away. So now I'm a heroin addict.
I wonder why Mark McKinney wound up in this movie. Did you notice he was Rex? He was the guy that owned the bar that they went to.
don't think I
Remember
noticed that.
after they get kicked out and they say that Dez is fired, he says, "We'll go to Rex's because they'll know to look for me there when they realize it's a mistake." And at one point, like Rex himself comes over, is like, "Oh, it's a mistake. They'll be here for you soon." He's like, "Good man, Rex," and that's Mark McKinney of Kids in the Hall fame.
Wow. No, I did not realize that was him.
Yeah, I think the only reason I realize is because like just recently I've been watching some Kids in the Hall again.
Great show.
And I looked it up, and sure enough, it was him.
He's in this show Superstore that just did their last season last year.
I've watched almost all of it. I guess I haven't seen the last few episodes, but I've seen almost every episode. I watched the first 6 seasons.
I'm a pretty big fan.
Yeah,
I like the last few episodes they had Dave Foley guest star, so that was cool.
Oh yeah, I'd be looking forward to that. Love Dave Foley.
He plays the owner of whatever the store is called. Heavenly Day.
Cloud9.
What is this? Cloud9. I never would have got that.
They say it like every episode.
They do. They say it constantly. Yeah.
Well, welcome to Cloud9. Have a heavenly day. Yeah. But it's really Superstore.
It's nice to see Mark still working in comedy.
My main grocery store literally is called Superstore. But it's a grocery store. It's not like a Costco type situation. So
they really pulled out all the stops on that name. In case there's any question.
Yeah. I mean, whenever stores have weird names, if you're used to them, you just don't think about how they're weird.
That's true.
Because it's funny to me, like, often sometimes when you guys do live streams and you'll talk about things like, I don't know, burger places and things like that in the US, like, so many of those names sound bizarre to me. And they are. Mm-hmm. But if you're there, you're just used to them. Like places like Whataburger or In-N-Out. I'm like, those sound retarded. But, you know, you just get used to them.
Sounds like it's sexual.
Yeah. Or it at least sounds like a place that's like really half-assed. Like, we really half-ass your food. You want to get in and out as quickly as possible. We put no effort into this. Yeah, it's funny that you say it's funny. I tolerate that movie even though it's not nearly as good as the comic, and it's probably because I do like her. It is strange casting because, like, in the comic, she's actually kind of like masculine and certainly not conventionally attractive, to the point where fans thought she was a lesbian, and then in the sequel, she actually has sex with a dude, and people are like, "Oh, but whatever." But
I knew you were a big fan of that one. It's one on
Whiteout's another movie I know I shouldn't like because it's not a good adaptation of the comic, but I like it anyway. And I think the main thing is I just like seeing Kate Beckinsale. Because no, it's not a good movie.
I didn't realize it was an adaptation of the comic. So
yeah, Greg Rucka.
Probably for the best.
Yeah, I've got that over there in the next room. I have the thing that has both. The sequel's not as good, but you know, I love things set in Antarctica anyway. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, this is the only movie I can think of where I think Beckinsale gives like a really interesting performance. The rest of the time, I don't want to just call her one-dimensional or eye candy, but that kind of is what she has been for me. You know, she's pretty and nice to look at, and the characters don't matter that much. But I feel like she's playing a character with some interesting depth in this movie, even though she herself is playing a somewhat narcissistic, shallow person, and she's kind of mean. But there is still something under the surface there that I enjoy. And I feel like all the characters at least have one or two moments of that where they feel beyond, like, not just being caricatures. They feel there's something real about them. As I said, I was really confused by, like, poor Jimmy's trajectory. Because by the end, he's kind of the butt monkey. Like, they all act like he's going away. And, I mean, he is doing the bad thing in a way. Because he doesn't have the bravery to just face Charlotte and break up with her. He's just like, it'll be better to put an ocean between us. And Des is like, why? I don't know. So he does do kind of a dick move at the end there, but I mean, nothing too bad. And other characters have done worse, but they're all just like, yeah, Jimmy sucks. I'm glad he's over in Spain.
In 2012, Kate Beckinsale did a movie called Republicans Get in My Vagina.
Oh, okay. I'm going to be a Republican now. Right? There's your motivation.
Whatever it takes.
Switch allegiances or whatever. Oh, that's cool.
Oh yeah, she was in Click, where she was yet another woman
Unrealistically attractive love interest, or possible
that's
was his
out of his
wife.
league completely.
Yeah, is she Sandler's wife in that?
I think
Just
so.
love to see the lineup of women that are his wife. I mean, he does 2 movies where his wife is
Sophia, no, Selma Hayek.
Selma Hayek, and in one of them he even points that out, like I guess just to make fun of the audience because he's explained because he's got a kid who likes this hot girl, and he's just like, but I don't
Yeah,
know, I don't. He's like, look at me, I'm not good looking. How am I going to get this? How am I going to get this guy? It's like, oh, you'll get it. Look at me and your mom. That doesn't make any sense. It's like, damn right, Adam.
you're a fucking nerd. You just need to get some money.
Yeah. What are the grown-ups? The grown-ups movies. That's what they are.
Yeah.
I like how
Yeah.
a whole bunch of people have brainwashed themselves into thinking those movies would be good if Chris Farley was alive to do them. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I'd much rather see Chris Farley than fucking uh, Kevin James, obviously.
Yeah.
But I still don't think that saves the movies. But I really do hate Kevin James, though. We're not going to go there. It'll just me being on a rant. I really, really hate him. I don't think he has a shred of talent.
He's in a movie that's based on the coach of the New Orleans Saints got suspended for a year for putting out bounties on players that hurt other players in games.
Oh yeah.
And when he did that, he went to Texas and coached his son's like football game. Like he was in like junior high or something. And Kevin James is that guy. So look that one up, folks.
That was his research for the role.
No, that was the role. That's what the movie was about.
Oh, what? Well, oh, okay. So after he got fired or whatever, he decided to just coach the kid. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought you meant like Kevin James coached a kid so that he could learn about football coaching.
What a bizarre thing to make a movie about.
Yeah. I guess there's weirder things, but yeah. What a great role for him.
Yeah, apparently he's like much fatter and uglier than the actual coach. I'm not even sure what he looks like, but
shouldn't they make a movie about the coach at the university that like abused all those players? That seems like a more important movie to make.
The Sandusky?
Yeah.
Is that his name? The Penn State guy?
Penn State, yeah. Because that was like a huge thing that went on for years, apparently. Feels like there's going to be several movies about that.
That wouldn't be a fun movie to watch, I don't think, but yeah.
It wouldn't be fun. An Oscar. It's obviously a big thing that happened, I mean, they've done stuff about sexual abuse in, say, the Catholic Church, so
yeah,
they might as well do movies about this too.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm never not thinking about sexual abuse these days. I just watched the first 2 episodes of We Need to Talk About Cosby, which is probably what I was thinking about. Which is probably what I was thinking about Quaaludes, because they do a lot of Quaaludes.
Rudy.
Yeah. My relationship with Cosby is weird for someone my age because I basically ignored him for most of my life. I knew who he was. I knew he had a sitcom, but I didn't really care. And I don't know. It was hard for me to understand his place in the world and just how big a star he was.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't dislike him by any stretch. I don't know. I didn't think about him or was very interested. And I never really watched The Cosby Show. It was probably on repeats when I was a kid, but it's not like I wasn't going to watch a black sitcom. I watched Family Matters. So maybe it was a timing thing with Bill Cosby.
Yeah, probably so. He was a huge stand-up before that show.
Yeah, and all the stuff he did in the 70s, I didn't find that out until I was like way older. Like when I was a kid, I never ever saw like any of the educational stuff he did or Fat Albert. I had no idea that even existed. I think at one point I knew there was a show called Fat Albert that was a cartoon that had like African American characters. And I think it was probably still several years after that I found out that it was like created by Bill Cosby and that he was like the voice. Like I didn't even know that. I didn't even connect those things together. But for certain people of a certain age, they grew up watching the show.
Yeah, I was a big fan of his stand-up and his Cosby Show, and like he made all his money like producing a lot of shows for television, like Fat Albert, and he did a Different World.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of flaws and criminality there, but he was a smart guy. He was smart.
He's a good businessman. And I think it's hilarious that like when he got acquitted or whatever the verdict was, I know they threw the case out because something was not handled properly.
Yeah.
He's in the background doing his Fat Albert impression. He's like, hey. Like, man, there's a time and a place. This is not it.
I don't know. He's like,
It's
I'll just
so
stick
funny,
it to
man.
all those people that wanted me in jail. I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? But we need to talk about Cosby. It's very interesting. There's going to be 4 episodes. 2 episodes are out. It is really interesting because it's done by that Camus. I can't remember his name, but I think he did that show called United Shades of America. I think it's that guy. If you ever seen that show, where he's a black guy. He's a stand-up comedian. He does other things, but he had the show called United Shades of America that I think was on CNN sometimes, where basically he would like go examine like small like subcultures that usually had like racism. Now sometimes it was a big thing, like he'd go talk to KKK guys, but he also went and talked to like these black racists that like hate white people, and he would talk to various groups, and it was always about race. It was a pretty interesting show. But he's the one that has done this thing. We need to talk about Cosby because apparently, like he said, like I'm basically a child of Bill Cosby. I grew up in the 70s. I'm a black stand-up. You know, he was my hero. And it's interesting because he said, like, I reached out to a lot of people and so many of them said no. Now, not much has been shown yet in 2 episodes, but I'm hoping. But one of the people they're talking to is Michael Jai White.
Why?
I
guess because he was a big Cosby fan, probably.
I guess, because again, probably saw him. I mean, he's a black guy in the movie industry, so probably saw Cosby as a role model. Maybe, I don't know.
The Cosby Show was different than all the other like Norman Lear shows because it was upper class. They were both professionals. Yeah. You know, it wasn't like Good Times where they were working class people. We're talking about the upper crust because
he's a doctor, right? It's like
he's a doctor and his wife's a lawyer, I believe.
They're affluent,
and it was a really popular show in general. But I think for young black people, it probably was. It's nice to see them presented in that way. So, something they can aspire to be, but it's just such a damn shocker when all this allegations whatever happened, happened,
and all this stuff gets really magnified in the show. Like I said, I think in the last few years, I started to understand like his place, but this show really talks about just what a massive figure he was, particularly, for African-Americans in the business. Just because the way he represented himself and things he did. They talked about how, he did that show I Spy with Robert Culp. Was the big deal, of course, just because he was the black star of a show, and also because like it was the 60s and it was a very different portrayal of a black guy. He was educated, he was smart, and he was
right.
And he was cool and all this stuff. He's kind of like a James Bond type character. But there's some cool behind the scenes stuff where and they say, did you know, and they ask a few people, including White, do you know the story about him and the stuntmen? And it turned out like they didn't have black stuntmen back then. And he's like, you need to actually get an African-American to double me for these stunts. This is ridiculous. And he's kind of why like black stuntmen even started to get jobs back in the day. Because they found some guy that had worked basically as an extra on one of those, I don't know, just one of those white things. It might have been, it wasn't Hogan's Heroes, but it was one of those shows about like soldiers. And anyway, and they're all white characters, but then like there's like one black soldier who's kind of just in background scenes. He doesn't even have like a role. Mm-hmm. And Bill Cosby found him and said, "You don't want to be doing this. Come be my double." And he became a stuntman that way, which is pretty cool. So they talk a lot about like just like the impact he had. And the truth was like it was interesting because in his comedy he dropped stuff. He didn't talk about race. And maybe that's why some audiences liked him, right? He just didn't make that an issue. He just talked about whatever they could relate to him. But once he had the power and position, he really did start talking about race and especially trying to educate like young black people and talk about, the way our history has been ignored in this country and blah, blah, blah. I mean, he really stood up. So
he got a lot of backlash for a lot of that stuff too.
Couldn't have been easy.
In the black community.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a really interesting show because, like as I said, I was not always, but I mean most of the time aware of what a figure he was. But this show really takes you through it, like his rise and everything, and all the things he did. As you said, it makes it all more shocking, and it just shows how it always works with a lot of these things. I mean, it's the same thing if you found if you believe the stuff about Michael Jackson. I believe the stuff about Michael Jackson. I didn't for years. I do now. And I think it's hard to say because sometimes people want people to be all good or all bad, right? And I feel like Michael Jackson was a warm, caring person who cared about the other people, who didn't just, contribute to things like charities to make himself look good, but because he really cared and he wanted to help people and all this stuff. But I also believe that he did those things and he just thought that he wasn't wrong in doing them. But some people, they can look at it one way. It's like, well, why would he be such a nice guy? Why would he do all this if he's like this bad guy that abuses children? And I'm like, because he doesn't see it that way. He doesn't see himself as an abuser and things like that. So, but a lot of people, they can't make that. And this is not my passion plea for people to think this way of Michael Jackson. I'm just saying that's the decision I eventually made. I didn't believe it for years. For years, I always said, I know he did stuff that was inappropriate, but I think he didn't really realize it, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't until, some more really explicit stories came out that I started to believe it.
Yeah, it's what's separating art from the artist, right?
Yeah. Thing with Cosby, I guess, was like that Cosby was basically towards the end sort of freely admitting that he did these things because he didn't think it was a big deal. He's just like, yeah, I gave them drugs so I could have sex with them. Isn't that what people do? Like, I'm paraphrasing, but not that much. But anyway.
Yeah. First time I saw Cosby, I think, was on like Nickelodeon had just become a channel when I was a kid. And there was this show called Pinwheel House, I believe it was called. And he painted stuff. Like he had a segment every episode where he would paint, which was, it was cool. He liked to do stuff for kids. I mean, yeah, he raped a lot of women, but I mean, come on.
I mean, but come on. Probably the first thing I actually saw him in was like commercials, probably, because I didn't watch the Cosby Show as a kid. I knew what it was. I didn't watch it. I probably saw him doing like Jell-O commercials and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's funny how spectacularly awful his movie career is.
Ghost Dad? Did you ever see Ghost Dad?
No, but I've seen like most of it in a way, and I've seen like the Nostalgia Critic cover it, so I kind of feel like I've seen it. I've been taken through it. I love movies like that like come up with a concept and then they can't even understand what their own rules are. Because like, you can only see him in the dark or something, or sometimes he can pass through things, but sometimes he can stand completely solidly. Like, it's like this was not thought through at all.
Yeah. Making it up as they go.
Well, that's what I mean. I can't remember. I remember like footage of like resurfacing again of I can't remember what actor. But some well-known actor like giving a speech for some award or something, and then like talking about like what a warm and great person Weinstein was, because that's what people knew at the time. He was just a nice
Kevin
person.
Smith?
It wasn't, but it could have been somebody like it. It wasn't. It was an actor, but it could have been because he and Kevin Smith had a close relationship.
They were like good friends, and then when all that hit the fan, he kind of distanced himself. I mean, obviously.
Well, I figure that's what pretty much anybody would do.
Yeah.
Well, the thing was, like, there was also that story that, like, Ben Affleck knew something. Like, something happened some year that, like, a long time ago, and Ben Affleck saw it, and he was mad about it. And apparently Ben Affleck had a conversation with him, and that was the end of it. And then, like, years and years later, but again, still before the thing blew up in 2017, some actress said something to him about it, and Ben Affleck's reaction was, damn it, I told him to stop that. It's like, okay, Ben, I'm not saying it's Ben's job, like, or anything, but maybe he could have done a little more. Like, he seemed to think, I told him not to be a sleazebag, and he didn't listen to me. Like, I did all I could do. Like, I don't know. I'm not trying to come down to Ben Affleck. I just feel like maybe you're a bit naive, Ben, if you thought you gave him a talking to and that was the end of it,
Well, it's like a lot of this stuff. I mean, it was widely known, in Hollywood about Cosby and, Weinstein and, a lot of these guys.
Yeah, I know. I can remember not too long before that, like, who was it? MacFarlane. Not Todd McFarlane, sorry, Seth MacFarlane. Seth MacFarlane was like hosting one of those things, doing his thing in the suit and making jokes. And he said something like, it was some joke, just something about how like the young actresses tonight, they wouldn't have to pretend to be attracted to Harvey Weinstein or something like that. And everybody in the audience laughed. They're like, that's Harvey, all right, including some of the women that probably knew a lot more than the joke was letting on.
It's like a lot of the people, like Kevin Smith, for example, like they act like they had no idea any of what was going on. And I don't buy that. Like when you're running in those circles, like, this guy is doing some nefarious stuff,
Yeah.
I don't buy it.
We'll get off this in a minute, but I'll say the one that I found the most fascinating that I read the most on recently because I found a really big long article about it was Bryan Singer. Oh my
Yep,
god!
I was about to bring him up, and
like it's so sad if you follow up some of these guys. Like he like destroyed their goddamn lives. Like not to say like anything that happened to these women with say Cosby that like they weren't affected. Of course they were. You know they're affected for their life. I'm just saying some of these guys these were just kids that didn't even have any real place inside anyway. Like they weren't big actors or anything like that. They were just kids, you know, that he thought was good looking. And then like he discarded them and they got, you know, their lives were like wrecked.
It makes you wonder why he never got any backlash because I mean, hell, they did that documentary about that outed a few people, and like, I mean, he would have like parties, like sex parties. People would come over and they drug these kids,
yeah,
and have sex.
And again, and it was pretty well known that he liked boys that were probably 16, 17. Like that's what he preferred.
Still making movies too.
Is he? Wow. And I didn't realize, I mean, I knew he'd done some movies that made him successful, but apparently he was like a producer on the show House, and that made him like ridiculously rich. Like, so like Singer, like you're like, okay, he's a successful director. He's pretty rich. Turns out he was like way more rich and powerful than you would think. And a lot of it because he was a producer for House, and House was like a smash hit. And he just made a shitload of money off that. Because they said like the parties and stuff, like he just dropping millions of dollars here and there like it was nothing. So because when you think, okay, but there's bigger directors than him. But
yeah.
I mean, but when you get into things like that, like producing credits and things like that, that really adds up. Because
those guys make the real money,
right? You don't think too much about like Jerry Bruckheimer, but Jerry Bruckheimer is like disgustingly rich. I don't know what his net worth is, but I mean, it would be a lot higher than even some of the best directors you can name.
Right.
So yeah, producing really gets
him
in there.
I mean, like Spielberg's probably made more money with Amblin than he has, you know, getting paid for directing movies. So
yeah,
you know, with all his, you know, producing stuff. Yeah, I think it was Joe Rogan who said, like, as soon as he got to Hollywood, like back in like maybe even the 80s, like it was a guy came up to him in a bar and told him that Bill Cosby drugs and rapes women.
Wow.
So like, it was just some random guy.
I mean, yeah, like stuff like that does get out there. Like it can't be a secret forever.
Yeah, people knew, you know. Probably the women going to his house knew.
At least some of them. I mean, they have an interesting talk sort of about like the misconception people make about like consent when it comes to like taking drugs and things like that. Because the idea is, because it's like talking about like a date rape drug. Well, you don't really have to call anything a date rape drug. I mean, if you want to go by what's used to rape the most people, it's like alcohol. So you can say alcohol is a date rape drug. But I mean, and the guy says it's like saying like, well, what's a murder knife? Well, a knife, that's just a knife that a murderer happens to use. That's a murder knife. I thought it was interesting because he says, because the idea is when it came to Cosby and probably people like him, it wasn't like, sometimes we think of like slipping something into somebody's drink, you know, without them knowing. The thing about Cosby was it was a climate where certain drugs like the Quaaludes and things were accepted. So he was giving them something they wanted anyway. He'd be like, here, you want this? And they'd be like, yes, I do. And he said, because the difference there is you willingly accept these drugs because you don't think the person giving them to you is a rapist, you know? So that's where,
right.
So you are consensually taking the drugs, but that does not mean you are consenting to be sexually assaulted, you know? Yeah, apparently Tarantino has another story that's like similar to Affleck's, which was something like, "Oh, I told him to cut it out or something.
Knock it off.
Listen to me." You know, yeah, like something like that. I was just like, maybe you need to do a little bit more in that situation than just
more shenanigans.
Than shake your finger at him or whatever.
But I mean, in their case, like Weinstein was basically their boss. So I mean, what are you going to do? I mean,
that's true. I mean, at a certain point, they become big enough. But you're right. Like maybe when they were closest to Weinstein, they did rely on him. You know, he was the producer or whatever.
What are you supposed to do? Go on Entertainment Tonight and say, you know, Weinstein's raping people? I mean, like I don't know how you deal with that. And I mean, you know, you would get some kickback for that as well.
It takes a certain amount of guts because I mean, remember what really brought things home for Cosby? It was exactly that. just in a different way. It was Hannibal Buress doing his own stand-up and then just saying, bringing up Bill Cosby and going, Bill Cosby, telling young black men to pull up their pants. Like, what the fuck are you? You're raping people. Like that. That was the first a lot of people heard of it. That's really what got that out a few years ago. Was Hannibal Buress saying, like, he'd obviously known for a while, and he's like, fuck, I'm just gonna say it. I'm gonna say it in my stand-up. I'll say it in public. But I mean, that's not exactly the same as going on Entertainment Tonight or giving an interview, but it's still getting it out there. And that is really what made the waves, was Hannibal Buress saying that. And obviously he did get backlash for it. You're like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't that. Yeah, so I don't know if he did that because he's like, somebody's got to do it. I think it was more like, if I know, I should speak up, I guess, his type thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Is that was like before the Me Too movement, right? The whole Cosby thing.
The start of it was, because the first one was like 2013 or something, I think. It was the first time, not the first time ever, but like the first time it like sort of made like what big headlines. I'm gonna check the timeline on that actually.
Because I know the Weinstein deal, that was all Me Too, right? That was basically what kicked it off.
That's what kicked it off. That was like 2017. That's really what kicked it off. So there's a whole page on Wikipedia called Bill Cosby sexual assault cases.
Awesome.
And it is massive. The earliest allegation against Bill Cosby dates back to December 1965. Oh, yeah, but no, wait. I don't want the allegations. I want when it was when they were spoken. I don't want the earliest incident. I want the earliest like reporting of an incident. But yeah, Buress remarks was 2014. On October 16, 2014, as part of a stand-up comedy routine in Philadelphia, Hannibal Buress addressed Cosby's legacy on talking down to young black men about their mode of dress and lifestyle. Buress criticized the actor's public moralizing to say, yeah, but you raped women, Bill Cosby. Do you think that brings you down a couple notches? The audience appears to respond to Buress's education as an incredulous joke. Then he encouraged everyone to search Bill Cosby rape on Google when they got home. Buress had been using the same Cosby routine for the previous 6 months with little response, but word of the October performance spread rapidly after being posted on Philadelphia Magazine's website. Media coverage intensified with numerous publications tackling the question of how Cosby had managed to maintain, as Buress called it in his routine, a Teflon image despite more than a decade of public sexual abuse accusations. Shortly afterward, USA Today reported that either Cosby or his representative posted a request for Twitter's followers to go ahead, meme me. The tweet was deleted after a large number of the submitted memes made references to the accusations against Cosby. Yeah, that's pretty bad timing for let's make a meme. There must have been some fun ones in there.
Cosby just in the back.
So that was October 20. So that's October 2014. So that's not the first time anything ever brought up, but that's when it was really became a big thing. So that's about 3 years before Me Too really kicks off, which really was, like we said, the Weinstein thing.
Yeah. Fine with me. I've never done anything that I'm ashamed of, so fine with me.
Well, I mean, you want younger girls and women to be able to grow up in an era where it's not like, because you always hear the story, like I couldn't tell anybody, nobody would believe me, or it would wreck my career, or blah 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 blah. Which was really much the truth. And when it came to someone like Bill Cosby, he was just so powerful and so beloved. It is hard to get people believing. What's funny is that there's a joke on 30 Rock that, like, I don't know if it's just a joke or what, but it ages pretty well, because there's a part where, like, Tracy, as played by Tracy Morgan, has, he's the big star of their show, and he's temporarily left the show. He's mad at them about something, and they're trying to come up with a way to get him to come back. And Alec Baldwin's character thinks he can trick him by making him thinking he's talking to Bill Cosby. So he calls some guy into his office, just some black guy that can do impressions, and he says, talk to Tracy and do your Bill Cosby thing. He's like, Tracy, I want you to come back to the show with the pudding and the thing like that. And Tracy on the other line goes, Bill Cosby, you got a lot of nerve talking to me after what you did to my aunt. And he's like, I think you got me confused. He's like, 1974. She was a cocktail waitress with a droopy eye. He's like, Jack, how dare you make me talk to this man? And he slams up. And this was years before any of that.
Yeah.
So it's aged pretty well.
Wow. So, I mean, obviously, it's somebody knew about that. I mean,
Yeah, that
when
stuff doesn't
they
come
wrote
from
that bit.
nowhere. Yeah, it has to come from somewhere.
What did Brett Ratner do? I didn't realize he was on the chopping block as well.
Yeah, I used to get him and Singer confused. But there's a difference. Because wait, Singer did X-Men, right? Oh,
Yeah.
Ratner did Rush Hour, right? That's what he did. He did Rush
Okay.
Hour. Those were his big movies. Yeah, I used to get Singer and Ratner confused. Ratner is somebody whose name I now have not heard in recent years. So maybe he got totally canceled. Because the other thing about Singer is like there's no charges that have ever stuck against him.
Mm-mm.
And he did the usual thing, like he fought it with a bunch of lawyers and deny, and all this stuff. But I don't believe him.
Money is a good way to get out of this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really unfortunate because I mean, a guy like Bill Cosby or Weinstein could probably get, you know, basically any woman they want with their clout and their money. You know.
Yeah. As we said before, I think it just becomes being sort of too greedy and believing too much in your hype and stuff like that, right? Because well, Bill Cosby, there's many women that were willing to sleep with him. Not all of them were, and maybe that bothered him. So maybe he thought, I should be
Yeah.
able to still use what I have to get these other women.
Well, Cosby actually did rape the women, but like Weinstein, like that was consensual, right? It was just more of a casting couch, situation. Like, hey,
Yeah, I
let's
don't.
do this, and then we'll get that role for you.
I mean, at least some of the stories say no, that like he did force things on
He
them.
did. Okay.
I mean, not all of them, some of them. And as far as that goes, I mean, that's still something. It's I can't remember what it is, but it's something.
It's abuse of power. Yeah, it's got a term. I forget what it is, but I mean, at least to me, that's not as bad as drugging someone and raping them. Because it is consensual. Well, I
Yeah,
guess
I mean,
assuming it is
sometimes
consensual.
I guess the line of consent gets blurred sometimes if it comes out like it's maybe because sometimes it's a promise and sometimes it's a threat. So I don't know. Because sometimes think people like, if I don't do this, what I'll do. Because I remember that was one of the things in the early things. The guy that had built Fox News, he died a few years ago, and it all came out that he'd, done stuff to certain women at the network,
Really?
like Gretchen Carlson and people like that had stood up to him. But and then because of that, somebody that he'd like didn't actually assault, but somebody that he'd sort of propositioned way back when, like in the 70s when he was like younger, and some model or something had come in and he was telling her to do all these poses and lift up her dress and stuff like that. And at one point, like he says, like, he basically says, well, you want the job, whatever, like that, you got to sleep with me. And she's just like, well, I don't want to do that. And he didn't touch her or anything, but he got really mad and he threw her out. And he said, like pretty girls like you are a dime a dozen, and he said, like, you're trash, and threw her out. He never touched her or anything, but that's still something, right? And then years later, I guess he did actually touch some people at Fox, but that was a long time ago. I mean, a long time after.
I hate to tell people this, but that's not a new thing. Like, you guys think in the 40s and 50s and 60s, this shit wasn't going on like rampant.
Right. So that
then,
was kind of what the story I told was. That was like maybe the early 70s or something, like saying, even when he was young. But of course, back then it was considered so normal that like nobody even talked about it or thought anything about it.
right. I mean, it's almost like a lot of these women, like they get some age on them and they get a little bit of, popularity, and they're ashamed for what they did, maybe to get a role or whatever. But I mean, that's nothing new either.
I mean, back then you had to be kind of a monster for anybody to notice. Like Fatty Arbuckle apparently was like some sort of like wild rapist, and that was like one of the only reasons he was sort of like in a way canceled. I mean, he died, but I just mean was because by their standards, like they let so much go, it didn't even matter. But he was like such like, I mean, the story goes he like raped one woman literally to death. So
God,
there's not anywhere
how
to
do you?
Because he was huge. He was Fatty
Oh,
Arbuckle. He was a big,
he had a
huge
big
guy.
dick, didn't he? Oh, okay.
I don't know about his dick, but like he was just huge. He was a big
He
guy. And
smothered.
apparently, he like smothered her and he like half crushed her. Apparently, in his attack on this woman, she was just a tiny, young, thin girl. That's never been completely substantiated, but it was a strong enough story where people were like, okay, like fuck him. And this is like the 20s, when pretty much anything was allowed. But I'm just saying that was so brutal that at least it canceled him because it was just such an overt and brutal thing. But yeah, I mean, back then it's just considered part of the business, and as they said a little in the Cosby thing too. Like if you're in the '60s or whatever, if you were a guy who was known as like a woman, like not, I'm not talking necessarily rapist or anything, but a womanizer, a guy that would use women and cheat, like you just basically got patted on the back for it. They were like, well, that's what we expect from you. You're it's like good for you type thing.
Keep them in the kitchen.
Yeah.
I think it was Milton Berle I'm thinking of that.
Oh yeah, I know.
Had a huge one.
Yeah, that's pretty much been confirmed a lot, which is terrifying because you look at that guy's face and and he was super proud of it because he showed it to people all the time. Yeah. He said like he hosted Saturday Night Live in like the '70s, and he was like in the dressing room with like, what's his name, Lorne Michaels and a few other people, and he just goes, "What do you think of the boy?" And then he just takes his dick out. And he's like, I'm looking at this anaconda, and I'm like, my God,
That's like the Ric Flair thing on that airplane ride from hell or whatever it's called.
Oh, I don't know.
He apparently did the helicopter a bunch around one of the flight attendants.
Well, that lines up with what I know about Ric Flair.
So he was
a wild.
He was always naked, they said, and he's somewhat canceled now. Because of it.
He must be 100 years old. He was old like 25 years ago.
Yeah, he's old.
Well, I mean, it's the same, like almost all those businesses. It's almost the same. Wrestling's a kind of show business. I'm sure wrestling was misogynistic and sexist and shitty as hell in the older days too, and took a while, all these things. So it's been sort of a reckoning, which I guess is good.
So there's our 45-minute rape discussion.
Yeah. You always had to get something in. There's no rape in this movie, so we pulled some out of real life for you. But I don't know. The more I watch this movie, the more I like it, and I really like his look and feel. I'm really interested to see Metropolitan, and I don't know. It's been a long time since I've seen a movie that I hadn't seen like a bunch of times before, where I felt that strongly about like the dialogue being really good. I think so many of the conversations and lines are really memorable. And as I said, there's a difference between dialogue I enjoy in a movie because I'm like, it's funny, it's snappy. And then there's dialogue that I'm like, it actually sounds real to me too. And I feel like, oh, Jesus Christ. Maybe. I could believe anything about that guy. And I don't know enough about Halle Berry, so I don't know. Don't know what she was into.
Think of The Last Boy Scout. Maybe the first movie I saw her in.
Yeah. See, that's probably the first movie I saw her in too, but it was years and years later. Somebody had to point out to me that was her. Like I didn't know. I wouldn't have known. I mean, yeah, she did stuff in the '90s, but it wasn't until the early 2000s that she became a star.
That's like Terry Hatcher in Tango and Cash. Very young Terry Hatcher.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually been able to remember some names tonight for a change.
Yeah, I remember the characters' names in this. I don't know the actors too well, which is fine. Whit Stillman's an interesting guy because he hasn't done a ton of movies. He's been around, but he hasn't done a lot of movies. And the movies he's most well known for is the trilogy that this movie is or unofficial trilogy, everyone calls it this movie. So this is probably his most well-known movie. He's done some things since that I don't really know anything about. But he definitely has a good grasp of maybe a certain generation or certain, I don't know, certain social classes or something, because I really do enjoy the dialogue in them. He did a film in 2011 called Damsels in Distress, starring Greta Gerwig, Adam Brody, somebody else. Never heard of it. Yeah, so he's done 3 movies in the last, like yeah. He just did those 3 movies in the '90s, and then he had a huge break till 2011, then he did one in 2016 and one in 2020, so I don't know what he did between '98 and 2011. That's a pretty long break. He probably did some other stuff, I don't know. But I don't know, I like his style. I'm really interested to see Metropolitan, and hopefully I can find
Yeah.
Barcelona.
Yeah, I may try to find those as well.
Oh, I also like the railroad apartment. I'd never heard of that before. That's
Me
the
either.
apartment that the girls wind up with. It sounds so terribly inconvenient because
Yeah.
it's long. It's just one long place. It doesn't have a hallway of its own with branching rooms, so every room just connects onto the next room. And it's like to get from the kitchen to the bathroom or something, you have to walk through 2 of the bedrooms in the living room or
Mhm.
something. And but the realtor or whoever points out that it does actually have one door at one end and one door at the other end. So if you wanted, you could go out into the external hallway and walk around. It's like, okay, I guess so.
I've heard people talk about that, like comics and stuff, when they're sharing rooms with multiple apartments. That can you imagine how bad that would suck to have to go through something? I guess you're just peeing in bottles or something at some point because if your roommate's like hooking up or something, like
Yeah, and they show like that happening in that scene after
yeah,
after the whole thing where they get kicked out of the club and they're all talking together, and a few times it gets repeated. The thing about how Charlotte was talking about the importance of group dynamics, and it's not all about such like I don't remember what the word she used, but like casually or whatever, or not casually, aggressively. I don't know, pairing off, and it gets Alice really upset because during that night, the object of her affection, Jimmy, had wound up with Charlotte. So
mhm,
she's like, "What?" And so when they leave and they're pairing off, like Des comments on it. He says, "Well, in nature, pairing off is still something that inevitably happens." And she's like, "What? You mean they're screwing their brains out right now?" And he's like, "No, I just said pairing off." And he chases her out into the rain. And it's the one time I think actually believe him, even though they do wind up dating later, because he says, "Don't go there. Come back to my apartment. We'll talk." And he says, "Nothing will happen. I just need someone to talk to you." Like in that moment, I actually do believe him. I believe that
yeah,
he only just wants to talk to her. But anyway, she doesn't listen. She goes back, and then she's forced with the awkward situation of her 2 roommates are both hooking up, and she doesn't know where to walk. And then the next morning, Charlotte gets really mad at her, saying, "What were you doing? Banging pots and pans around?" It's just like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so they have sort of their first really like sort of outright
mhm,
fight. And of course, is that the same night that that Charlotte outs everybody and tells everybody that she has gonorrhea? Like she deduces it in front of the whole group because she orders a Coke and she's like, "You're not drinking?" She's like, "No." She's like, "Why is that? Is it because of some medication you're on?" And she very quickly, logically works it back out loud in front of everybody that she must have gotten gonorrhea from that guy. And she goes, "How could you?" And leaves. And then the other ones get mad at her too. Just like that was really class of saying that to. And it shows Charlotte's like level of like of how oblivious she is. Because at one point, like one of the characters, can't remember which one, says, like, "Why would you say that?" And she's like, "No, I'm sure I'm right." She thinks that's the issue. She's like, "I'm sure that," and she is right. But yeah. And then later, of course, she can never give a full apology. And she gives this big long apology and she's really hard on herself and says, "I'm going to change." And then she says, "But if you look at it, the guys are find you more approachable now because everybody gets something at some point." And then that really is why and then 2 of the guys have like kind of that exact conversation. It's like, I used to think of her as really closed off, but so Charlotte's not exactly wrong, but there's nothing tactful about saying it.
yeah,
But yeah, that's just the type of person she is. She finally gives like a long, it seems almost sincere type apology, and then she like kind of like ties it up at the end by like saying, "But really, I kind of did you a favor anyway." Charlotte's not the type. And in the end, remember, it all comes down to a split between the 2 of them, where Charlotte says she can't be with her anymore because Charlotte's gone to the hospital for whatever the hell happened to her, and she visits her, and she says
yeah,
about how like it's clear that she and Jimmy are going to break up, like that Jimmy was going to break up with her just before she went to the hospital, and of course Jimmy is cowardly taken off to Spain because he doesn't want to actually. But then he says, "Did you know at some point while Jimmy and I were dating that he was interested in you?" And she just says, "Well, yes." And she goes, "I can't believe it. How could you?" And it's funny because if you read the Wikipedia part here in just the synopsis, where does it say? Charlotte asks if Jimmy ever expressed interest in being with her. When Alice admits that he did, Charlotte reacts with tears and tells her she will be moving out. That's not true. She doesn't say she'll be moving out. She says, you have to move out. She tells Alice that she has to move out, which is even better. So just the cycle of like abuse that gets rained down on Alice just continues in this movie. So it is funny. It is kind of like what Jake said. They just keep making her the butt monkey and all this stuff so that you drum up sympathy. And I mean, I can't help but feel sympathetic for her. I don't particularly like the character, but I guess I am happy that she's with Josh, who seems like a pretty nice guy. He talks about his various struggles with mental health, etc. And she seems to be okay with that. I don't know. I like Josh for his sincerity. He's the most sincere character. He's the one that gives the impassioned speeches about disco and the era and everything.
Yeah.
But and he is pretty honest with her, because at one point when he's finally confessing his feelings to her and she's still technically with Des, he's like, I am the type of person that will take no for an answer. He's like setting her up for that. And then at a later point, Des or somebody describes him, I think it's Jimmy actually says, well, he is the type of guy that would take no for an answer. It's like, I guess you know him pretty well.
Yeah, I like Josh.
Yeah. The subplots don't really matter that much, but I guess they help move things along. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the only really likable characters in the movie.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, even a guy that is after the same woman, he still gives him a warning to throw his cocaine out, so he doesn't get busted for dealing.
Well, I mean, he literally walks in on Des having sex with some random woman at the club. Yeah. And then Des comes back and says, he says, oh, she was in a really bad emotional place. And I was just, trying to help her out. He's like, you won't unfairly use this against me, in your pursuit of Alice. And he goes, no, I won't. I'm thinking, dude, the woman you want is being brazenly cheated on by this idiot. And he's saying, it's unfair of you to point that out to her because it didn't mean anything and it's not serious. But he's just like, no. That's the other thing about Des. Like, as likable as he is, you can't hide those faults.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, I don't think he really has. It's weird because it seems like he has this sort of epiphany in the cab or whatever when he's trying to escape and go to the airport. And he talks about how he doesn't really think he's a good person, but then he just sort of undoes that all with his little talk to Charlotte right at the end, where it's just like, our personalities are too big. Other people can't come to terms with it. It's like, oh, these idiots have learned nothing. But I don't know. I still don't really dislike either. Again, I think it just comes down to there being a sort of realism to it, because nobody's completely good. Nobody's completely bad. Everybody has their faults. Some people certainly are more flawed than others. Alice, you do want something good to happen to Alice, because most of the movie is a bunch of bad stuff happening to her. I mean, even some of the silent stuff, there's a part in a part without any dialogue where she has to go down to the pharmacy, and the pharmacist is putting her prescription together for gonorrhea and stuff, and he just hands her the bag and goes, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I mean, as somebody that's had to get that stuff before, not specifically for that, but I mean, thank God the pharmacist didn't go sorry when they gave me the bag. I would have felt like such a piece of shit. I'm already embarrassed enough. I'm picking up, something for an infection there. I don't need them calling attention to it. But yeah, if something bad can happen to Alice, it will, pretty much. But yeah, and also you see how things could have been averted somewhere towards the middle of the movie too, because how the trajectory works is Alice is initially interested in Jimmy, and Tom is sort of a guy who's kind of a backup. Jimmy gets kicked out of the club and she doesn't get to see him. And then, so she goes with Tom, and because she's sort of smarting from the stuff that Charlotte had just passively aggressively said to her, plus her weird advice about acting more slutty and aggressive, she does it to sleep with Tom, and it backfires in the worst way, because not only is that her first real sexual experience, or sexual intercourse experience, whatever, not only she wind up with the double dose of VD there, but then he comes back and admonishes her and tells her she's some sort of terrible seductress for doing that to him, and he's really disappointed in her from a moral standpoint because he thought she had more substance, but she's just a liar and a fake and a phony. Jesus. And then so later she's still trying to think about Jimmy, and this is before Charlotte winds up hooking up with Jimmy. But Josh has his sights on her, and Josh is in the club, and and this is when they're out as a group, and Josh is not part of the group. And he comes up, he's like, I don't know if you remember me. We met at a party, and I asked you where the kitchen was. And she's like, well, I remember, or you asked me where the kitchen was. She's like, well, I remember getting to the kitchen. which isn't great, but she's willing to talk to him. And then Charlotte steps between them and tells him to shove off. She's just like, hey, we're kind of doing a group thing here. And as a guy who takes no for an answer, he politely leaves. And and then she's like, what the hell was that about? And Charlotte explains, oh, I didn't like the look of him. Look the way he's eyeballing you. So again, Charlotte's being just like the worst kind of friend, if you want to call it a friend, making these decisions for you, saying who you can and can't talk to in a public place, and all under the guise that, I'm doing it to protect you. Plus, there's also that weird bit where they're on the subway together where the camera doesn't move from them. They're both talking to each other. So the camera is not on the guy. But then suddenly Charlotte goes, hey, what do you think you're doing? And remember, she screams at this guy and calls him a pervert and a deviant. So it suggests that he must have touched her, but we don't see anything. So part of me wonders if she just said that for the attention. She's like, get out of here, deviant, scum, and all this stuff. And and he just leaves. Like, they purposely don't put the camera on him and show him doing anything. So I think that leads you to think that maybe he's not doing anything and she just decides to have this outburst for the hell of it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, just another quirk of Charlotte, who is unlikable but still likable to me because of the actress. And because also, I guess, I find her kind of absurd. Although not too absurd, because she is realistic. Like, there are people very passive aggressive like that, and also people that like just think that they're so great and smart and things will work out for them, which is definitely her feelings on this. Because every time, just kind of like Des, every time she thinks she has like some moment of self-awareness or learning something, like she flips it around and comes up with some way to justify it and say, I'm fine, I don't need to change, I'm great the way I am, which is what a lot of people in real life definitely do.
Yeah.
Even characters that don't get a lot of dialogue have memorable stuff. Like Holly doesn't talk much, and they have this thing about like that Holly, she says like Holly has like a soft spot about her intelligence. She's like, what, is she dumb or something? She's like, no, she just dated all these Harvard guys, and since they're all nerds at heart, and they get a thrill out of being with somebody attractive, and they know they can't keep it going, so they dump her first, and they make up an excuse and say like she's dull or whatever. So she's like, she got really self-conscious about it, and now she doesn't even have a social life and all this stuff. And that even comes up a little bit because she's the one that winds up dating Dan, who actually has some brains and thinks of himself as an intellectual. And at one point he says like, she's smart, right? And you're like, oh yeah. And she's like, well, she's just so quiet, I don't really know what to think. And Dan really, again, defines himself as like an intellectual and a smart person. So it's, even though she's super hot, it's important to him that she's smart too, because that's the way he sees himself. But anyway, Holly has almost no dialogue. But then there's the part after she comes home from Charlotte outing her to everybody about having gonorrhea. Holly has this conversation with her where she's trying to make her feel better about it and saying how like herpes isn't that bad to have, really, because now any guy that is with you, he'll have to really seriously commit to you. And saying how there's a certain romanticism all tied up in it too, because he's willing to do that for you or whatever. And I don't know, it's kind of out of nowhere, but at least it gives Holly something to do. And shows at least Holly, unlike some of the other people, is genuinely trying to make somebody else feel better, which is really not what most of the characters are doing. They're trying to make themselves feel better, and sometimes at the expense of other people's feelings. At least Holly here is showing compassion that's not like steeped in hypocrisy or false. She's actually even though it's kind of a weird argument she's making a genuine effort to try to make Charlotte feel better, not Charlotte, Alice feel better. And plus, again, she and Holly don't have a previous relationship. They didn't know each other. They just became roommates out of necessity. So Holly's a pretty nice person, although she doesn't get much chance to show it off. I don't know if it's understood if she stays with Dan or not. We don't get to know. I mean, there's a few different little subplots going on in the movie that don't matter too much, but they do help tie things together. One is obviously the club is doing illegal stuff, and that all comes together with the case against it, which Josh is a part of. There's also the thing about working for the publishers. I guess one thing you can do is, I don't even remember what their actual positions are. What are their positions? They're just readers, right? Their thing is just to read through stuff and help this. It's basically to read through unpublished manuscripts and help decide whether or not it's fit for publishing. Because the idea is editors don't even read the first stuff. They have readers do it first. And then if the readers think it's any good, then the almighty editor might actually take a look at it. So the thing there is, one way you can move up is, and they're worried, and Charlotte has that conversation, right? She says, like, how do you get to be an associate editor even? And they say it probably takes about 4 years. And they're trying to come up with like shortcuts to do that. And one way is if one of the things you read and recommend becomes a bestseller. So one of the things is, what's her name? Alice picks this book that supposedly was written by the Dalai Lama's brother. And she says, I think it has real potential. And then it all starts to fall through because it's like, it turns out it was not by the Dalai Lama's brother. It was just by some guy in the US somewhere who was a fraud. And there's like, oh, you made a big mistake now. But then she made the decision of changing it from like nonfiction into like self-help. And it turned out to be like a really good seller. And it looked like she becomes an editor. She's the only, so she's one of the only ones that doesn't lose her job. Because that's what she's going to the at the very end when she's going to meet Josh for the date or whatever at the fancy place. They're like, wait a minute, don't you think it's a bad idea to take her out to that? You lost your job. He's like, well, she's not the one. She invited me because it's in celebration of her promotion. So So that's another little subplot. It's not that important, but it moves things along. So yeah, so she got lucky deciding what book. Well, not just what book, but I guess definitely going from, oh, we'll make it a self-help book because it's all full of spiritualism and stuff. And because those books do randomly sell really well sometimes, it worked out for her. So she gets the fast track to being an associate editor. But again, Charlotte isn't worried. She thinks, my talents lie in television anyway, and I'll be fine. And she probably will because people like that exist.
Right. Well, she's not used to not having to work hard for things.
Mm-hmm.
She's probably given a lot of things in life.
Yeah. I wish I'd written down more of her speeches and dialogue because so many of them are so good. But I would highly recommend this movie to people that are interested in that kind of stuff.
Yet another Brit stealing our jobs.
Yeah, I know. Again, completely believable as an American.
Oh yeah,
totally. You wouldn't think a Brit, and so young at this point. She didn't have much acting behind her at this point. And of course, if you like Disco, it's a nice little soundtrack. I really enjoy how they use that opening song too, because they sort of wrap it around the plot. They make that song like 10 minutes long because they just have little breaks where the music's still going, but the vocals aren't while scenes play out. And I think it's really deftly done. I think that's a really interesting opening scene. I know it's really sort of a collection of scenes, but that opening 25 minutes in and around the club, it just really helps introduce all the characters and set everything up nicely, and it gives you a really good atmosphere of what the club is like. As I said, even smaller minor characters like Bernie, the club owner, really have great moments because Bernie is really self-aware. I mean, at that point where he's talking to Dez and he's mad at Dez about the investigation and saying, you let these ad people into the club and you let this attorney into the club. Like at one point he just says, I'm not a nice person, Dez. He just says that because he knows he's not. And he also shows that he is smart too. Because at one point when he's telling the story about how Josh or somebody had let slip to him about the investigation. He's like, well, why didn't you tell me? He's like, because it just happened just now. And he's like, but you used the past perfect when you told me. And he goes, what? Yeah. And then he rephrases it and he goes, sounds like it happened a while ago. I'm thinking, wow, Bernie is pretty on the ball. I get why he owns the club. He might be kind of a sleazebag, but he knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that guy whose name I can't remember, like Bernie's right-hand man, the guy that's always trying to get Dez fired because he seems to really not like Dez. And they have that whole thing. He's like, Bernie, I made Bernie promise to fire you if this is left. He's like, you asked Bernie to promise to fire me? He's like, do you think Bernie keeps his promises? There's always a good rejoinder. But anyway, that guy, he's the one that comes in and tells them all the stuff at the end, right? They're coming out of the unemployment. Alice isn't with them yet. He's the one that tells them about how everything, the bottom has dropped out. And he's like, Disco's dead. The club's over. We've been paying people to stand outside to pretend they can't get in. He's like, it's all done. And he seems to have dropped his whole mean persona and he's just being really nice and polite and genuine with them. It's kind of funny. Like, I'm thinking, is that whole mean thing just something he does at work? And when he's off work, he's like normal and nice. And then he just says, anyway, I'm off to Florida. And you're like, fucking perfect. You think he's going to go down to some club in Miami and be there through the 80s. And that's exactly where he'll fit. He'll be the right-hand man to some other sleazy guy who's on a pile of cocaine at some like Miami nightclub. It's like, it looks like things are going to work out for him too. Can't remember his fucking name, but anyway. But it's kind of a weird scene because you don't expect him to be the one to come in and sum things up for you and everything like that. It's kind of unexpected. I like it though. Mm-hmm. And it did make me wonder. It's like through the whole thing, he's acting really mean, especially to Dez. And now suddenly he seems just sort of really nice and calm, which is funny. I mean, Dez is with them, but it's weird. I think it maybe just it was like he sees Dez sort of as a rival, right? They both have kind of the same job at the club, so he probably sees himself as eliminating a rival to be like second in command or whatever. It's never really explicitly done what Dez does, but apparently he is good at the job because he's right. When he says when he got fired, like they'll come and ask me back because they know it's a mistake. That's exactly what happens. they show up. It's just after he tells Alice the thing about pairing off and she runs off, she gets upset. As he goes to go outside, two of the guys from the club come in and they're like, Bernie wants you back. It was a mistake. And he's like, yeah. And he runs out and chases her into the rain. So he knew what he was talking about and he knew his value. But I think it'll be better for him as a person to not work in clubs anymore because I think it brought out the worst in him.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the ending is cool, too. Although it's too bad Kate Beckinsale isn't in it because I wanted to see her dance one more time. But it's just where suddenly, the Love Train song starts playing and everybody just breaks character to dance. I don't know. It's a little thing, but it's fitting. I like it. But apparently it was that sequence, just Chloe Sevigny dancing, more so than like her acting, that made the director of Boys Don't Cry want her.
Yeah, they originally wanted Winona Ryder for that role.
I see that. I mean, I could see her doing it. She's got sort of like the right look to play that sort of meek, dumped on character.
I could see it, yeah.
That Alice is. I think she's done that kind of thing before.
She may have been too old at that point, though.
98? I don't know. I mean, 98, she passes for early 20s in 98, don't you think?
Yeah, you're probably right.
I mean, she did Alien Resurrection in 97, and she still looks really young in that.
Yeah, she does.
So I think so.
Hey, Brian, how's it going? Cool. Well, you want to wrap it up?
Well, I mean, not to tie it all into the rape stuff we were talking about, because that was its own thing, but obviously there is talk about sexual politics in the movie and the dynamic between men and women. And I think it's interesting when Des has that thing where he says, the fact that you're a feminist just gives you like free reign to say all these insulting things about me and men, and he's saying how demoralizing it is and how it affects men and stuff. And it all seems really phony and fake, but he does make a few points that I kind of agree with. But then he tells a really weird story about that girl just suddenly showing her breast to him and it like messing him up. I love that so much. He's like, and I'm confronting by these breasts. The better part is later in the movie when Josh is saying that back to somebody, possibly to Alice. He said, did he tell you guys that story? She's like, what? It didn't happen? He's like, oh no, it happened. Just, I don't know. It's funny. And there's that part where he's talking about how like complicated men's are. He says, like, for instance, what men feel about breasts. It's not what you women think. So Charlotte goes, I'll bite. What is it? And he goes, I can't just come out, blurt it out. It's much more complex and nuanced than that. And that's what launches him into the thing. So there's just some, I don't know. I just think that's a really great line. It's more complex and nuanced than that.
I don't think it is. I don't think it's complex at all.
No, it's pretty much nature, right? I mean, honestly, think about why you like breasts and try to tell somebody, and it's not going to make any real sense.
Yeah. I don't think any guys ever complained that they came out too fast.
Yeah, but that's his.
She just took them out.
She took, and he's like, and he says something like it was jarring because the whole time he'd known her, like her breasts had never entered into the equation. Which, again, I don't believe in for a second.
Right.
Regardless of your feelings for a female acquaintance, you're aware of their breasts. That doesn't make me... We're not perverts undressing women with our eyes. But if somebody were to say, some other person who is callous and bad and shouldn't say these things, said, oh, that Alice, we'll use the Alice name, she has large breasts, doesn't she? You could say yes or no. You would know. You wouldn't be like, oh, I didn't notice. You would know.
Never thought about it before.
Yeah. That doesn't mean we're all horrible creeps sexualizing everybody. I'm just saying it's a visual thing. I mean, there is the odd girl or woman or whatever that has larger breasts than you think, and the clothing she wears kind of keeps you from knowing. But that's a whole other thing. I guess that's always a nice surprise, I guess, to a guy who's dating them. It's like, wow, they're much bigger than I expected. Or at least for somebody. Maybe not everybody is super surprised.
Yeah. Trying to think of an example. I know there's a lot.
Doctor's Orders is the opening song. Doctor Orders by Carol Douglas. That's the opening song. And then it ends with Love Train by the OJs. But there's lots of famous stuff in there. I'm sure they didn't want to go too obvious with some of it, like there is no Bee Gees. Although you might notice, and I mean, you'd have to be kind of tuned into disco, and I guess I kind of am to notice this. But if you watch the very first shot of Alice and Charlotte in the movie, the first way we see them is them walking down the street towards the club. But the shot is first their feet and their legs moving in perfect unison, stepping, and then the camera pulls up, and that's exactly like the Staying Alive video where the Bee Gees are walking down the
Yeah.
street. And it's exactly what they do in Saturday Night Live or Saturday Night Fever with John Travolta. It's the shot of the feet moving, and in this case, it's two legs in perfect synchronicity. You know, they're moving at the exact same step. And I figure that has to be on purpose. There's no way that's not on purpose. So that's a nice little sort of allusion to the song and the movie. So yeah, there is. I don't think there's actually any Bee Gees songs in there, but pretty much everything else is there. Although I don't see it here on the soundtrack named here, but I was sure that there was a crap. What's her name? Donna Summer song in there somewhere. I don't see it on the soundtrack.
You'd think so.
I was sure there was a
Wow.
Donna Summer song, but maybe it was just a different voice that sounded like her. Donna Summer was awesome back in the day. She had that song where people thought like she was having like real orgasms in the studio, which is pretty stupid. I mean, it's pretty easy to fake that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But they're like, no, like, I don't know, different stories. Either she was pleasuring herself or someone was pleasuring her because they wanted to, you know, get the authentic thing. I'll very quickly say, I remember years ago watching, like, just around the time I was discovering his movies. I mean, I'd even been on before or after one of his movies. You know, we talk about late night TV and stuff. And of course, I talk about Russ Meyer, Mr. Smut, Mr. Big, you know, movies with all his big tits. And I remember, even though his movies were softcore, you know, they weren't actually pornography, sometimes real sex did happen in and around them. And I guess, I don't know what movie this was, but there was an actress and she was talking about how she had a scene where she's supposed to, like, I don't know, she's like sitting on a floor, like with her hands back like this. And she's supposed to be like orgasming and, you know, screaming and stuff like that. Apparently, for some reason, either they didn't like how she was doing it or Russ Meyer didn't like it. And they were like, all right, somebody do it for her. And they're like, what are you talking about? We can't have that in the shot. And apparently they had her on like a weird stage or something. So they like cut a hole in the floor under her and literally got some guy on the set, like, I don't know, like some grip or something to like perform oral sex on her from underneath, which you can't see on camera, but you see her reaction. I'm like, what movie is this? And she was laughing, saying, yeah, the guy ate me out. It's like, holy shit.
Wow.
Talk about a different time and a different era. But I guess they didn't like her fake orgasm sounds. They wanted real. So, what's her name? I've only liked Renee Zellweger when she was super young, when she was in Empire Records. I've never really found her attractive after that.
11 to 45.
I haven't seen it, so maybe I'd like that. I don't know.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen that movie in a million years. It's pretty bad. I know that. Does that have Matthew McConaughey too?
Yep.
Yeah, I think of the right one.
They both exploded. That's really what got that movie released, I think, because I think it was going to get buried until they. Yeah, I don't know what she had that was big, but he had that. All right.
The Dazed and Confused.
Dazed and Confused, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Kimberly Pierce was the director of Boys Don't Cry. Her performance in The Last Days of Disco, particularly the upbeat dance sequence finale in the subway, got the attention of director Kimberly Pierce, who cast Savigny into Boys Don't Cry. Savigny received an Oscar nomination for her performance in that film, but said that all the films she's made, The Last Days of Disco is the one people come up to me about the most. This is pretty interesting. I can understand why, though, because I just think there's a lot to be said about the movie, which is why I thought it would be a good one to do.
Well, she's not usually the lead either. She's like the lead in this.
Yeah, that's true.
She's usually like a,
supporting character. Yeah.
Supporting, yeah.
But no, I guess we can wrap up because we don't need to analyze every conversation. But I kind of almost want to. I really like the conversation style in this movie. I guess people get that by now. So I don't know. Maybe some people won't like it or find it annoying, but but I've always liked that. I'll just give one more quote that I really like. So there's a part um, where Des is finally confronted. I think Jennifer Beals' character comes back, right? And she's like, you broke up with me and broke my heart and told me that you were gay, but you're not. It's just a lie. And he's like, yeah, I am. And he's like, well, I could be. And this is in the club or surrounded by people. He's on the stairs. He goes, I could be. So she's just like, oh, yeah, really? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, have you had sex with men? And there's this long beat where he like looks around and people are watching him. And he goes, well, that's defining it rather narrowly. And then she just screams and leaves. I don't know. I feel like Des sometimes. I always have some backdoor way out of something, some sort of cop out. So yeah, for all the stuff that Des does, it's kind of destructive. I still kind of like him just because, I don't know, I think he's funny. But it's funny too, like I said, like when he has that conversation, it's like, I've always found you to be a person with integrity, except for the way you treat women. And that's the one thing you can also give Charlotte too, is like as much as Charlotte is a bitch and has done these bitchy things and all that, she calls him out on it too. She's like, I know your whole act. And she says, and I've got no respect for it. She's like, you're not fit to lick the boots of my real gay friends. He's like, I don't want to lick the boots of your real gay friends. But anyway. So that's the last bit of dialogue. I just wanted to get out there because I enjoyed it so much. But anyway, yeah, Last Days of Disco. I'm definitely want to see the other films in this unofficial trilogy by Whit Stillman, being Metropolitan and Barcelona. I don't know where I'll find Barcelona, the middle one, but I do have Metropolitan taped. I'm just going to see what other actors are in Metropolitan because this shares a couple of the actors, including that actor, the guy who played Des that I just talked about. That's Christopher Eggman. He's in there. Maybe he's the only one. I don't know. But there is a thing where some of the characters get mentioned or something like that. Yeah, actual characters from Metropolitan and Barcelona make appearances. Oh, one of them is, there's this bit where they're at the club and Charlotte points out this woman who's like in her 30s, and they say, oh, she's one of the successful editors at our place. I don't know, maybe she found a bestseller or something like that. She's actually a character, I think, in Barcelona or something like that. So anyway, I definitely want to see the other movies. I see if they have the same sort of look and style. I imagine they probably would. I like the look and style very much. Dialogue, blah blah blah. I really like the opening 25 minutes. I think it's very nice filmmaking, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it was a neat departure too from what we just done. Same year, 1998, which was also the year that Thin Red Line came out. And I always point out, I think is a really weak year for film, but that doesn't mean there aren't some good ones. And I think this is a good one. Of course, I really love Thin Red Line. So yeah, it was a sort of a nice change of pace. It's been a while since we'd done a movie that was sort of dialogue heavy in this way. I mean, we did of course Persona, and that was still more than a year ago, which was dialogue heavy, but that was different. That was more, that was more thematic, whereas this is just sort of more of a storytelling and things like comedy of manners, sexual politics, socioeconomical things, all wrapped up in the era of the end of disco. And I can't end better than what I said before about that whole thing about how, like, it's the end of an era, sort of the end of their youth, and they're moving on from a time that they'll always think was sort of the best of their lives, which is different for every generation, but for them, it would have happened to be the disco years. And I like that it's also at the end. So even though when we're in the club and we see some of the more outlandish things, it's still not as tacky as some of the 70s stuff that you're used to seeing, like the platform shoes and some of the suits. Like the guys are wearing pretty much normal kind of suits that might even fly today. And the girls don't look all that odd either. I mean, there's people sometimes in weird costumes and they're shirtless guys. At one point, there's a naked woman because it's just that cool kind of club.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the woman that wears the leopard and tiger print. She's the one that Des is actually fucking towards the end there. Because
I thought that was her.
Yeah. And he's like, she was going through a really emotional time or something like that. But yeah. But I just mean, it doesn't go as hard as something like a 54 and showing like the excess of it. Because I think the idea again is it's winding down. They really do sort of get that across. People are having fun and it's hip and it's cool, but it's not the apex. It's not, It's not the zenith of it. We're in the decline. These are the last days.
It all got downplayed a good bit, which I think it adds to it. It's not. I mean, we're so used to seeing that now. I think that the juxtaposition here really adds to this movie.
Right. I think it's not just so much adding is that it doesn't detract from the characters themselves,
True.
right? You aren't like focusing on the spectacle of like, oh, it's 70s disco club. You see it, but it's not so over the top that you're distracted and you can focus on the character because the movie's very character driven about the various characters and their interactions and relationships with each other. So I think it really works from that perspective for sure. Whereas other ones, yeah. they really want to show you like stuff like 54, like they want to show you all that 70s excess. And again, this is supposed to be probably 1980 or early 81. It says it starts in September and ends like in the spring. So at the latest, I figure it starts in September 81, maybe ends in the spring of 82, but maybe it's 80. Who knows? But anyway, it's cool. So thanks a lot for anybody that joined us for this one. I know it was a little impromptu because we couldn't do it the day we wanted to do it, but I'm glad we got into it. And yeah, as I said probably last week, it didn't happen this week either, but at least we're getting stuff done. We will try to get a little organized so that we can give maybe a heads up of what the actual movie's going to be before you turn it on. So maybe people will know in advance. We can't always do that, but we'll try to do that where we can. But I mean, this wasn't as thrown together at the last minute as it might sound. We were almost going to do it yesterday, so we were ready. But anyway, thanks a lot, guys. So last days of disco. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll see you again real soon.
See you next time. Thanks.
Bye.
Come on.